Chapter 651, Invincible in the World, 2. Li Yueming turned around and sized up the old woman who was called the 16th ancestor by the Emperor of Deqi. The old woman ignored Jihoken and was too lazy to even glance at him. There was only Li Yueming in her turbid eyes. But even so, her arrival still gave everyone a shot of tranquilizer. Ji Feng, the 16th ancestor of the Great Qi, was once known as the #1 talented woman in the world 7,000 years ago. He was proficient in zither, chess, poetry, painting, and martial arts. Although she had retired a long time ago, unlike the great Zhou Dragon Emperor Ji Tian, traces of her activities could still be seen in the imperial palace of the Great Qi. Therefore, almost all the officials in Deqi knew that ancestor Ji Feng was not dead yet. A miracle that had lived for more than 7,000 years naturally had too many wishes. However, under the gaze of everyone in the throne room, when Ji Feng, who had already turned into an old woman, walked in front of Li Yueming, the first action was to fight back. Instead, he raised his walking stick and hit Jihoken, who was sitting on the throne. This happened very suddenly. It shocked all the officials in the court. In the few seconds just now, they had already imagined 1,000 or even 10,000 negotiation processes in their minds. But the only thing he didn't expect was this. Jihoken said in disbelief, "Ancestor, why?" Before he could finish speaking, Ji Feng raised her walking stick again and hit Jihoken again. It was different from before. The second strike was heavier than the first, both in terms of strength and position. When he was hit by the second strike, Jihoken finally came to his senses and didn't dare to speak anymore. He immediately lowered his head and did not dare to show any dissatisfaction. After finishing all of this, only then did Ji Feng bow slightly to Li Yueming and say, "Unfilial descendant, you deserve to be beaten." Li Yueming glanced at Ji Feng and then at Jihoken, who was not far away. He did not continue to be aggressive and said, "Senior is too polite. Junior rushed to the door first, so this is considered a disturbance." Seeing that he did not have the intention to continue pushing his luck, Ji Feng clearly heaved a sigh of relief. After his cold gaze swept across the group of ministers around him, he said, "Hoken must have been misled by a treacherous official, that's why he provoked you. Please give me a few days, and I'll give you a satisfactory answer." Li Yueming did not accept this suggestion and said, "Senior, regardless of whether they were misled by treacherous officials or not, it is an indisputable fact that the Great Qi sent so many soldiers to northern Ice River Town. If I hadn't come, how many people in the northwest would have lost their precious lives because of this war? If I can get over it so easily, I'm afraid that anyone will dare to step on the Star Moon Army and me in the future." Li Yueming's voice wasn't loud, but every word was very clear. At his current stage, the Star Moon Army's momentum was already established. The secular dynasties were no longer within the scope of Li Yueming's main enemies. As long as his personal strength was strong enough, he could protect northern Ice River Town from being attacked by dimensional reduction. With the expansion speed of the Star Moon troops, it would not take long for them to form a wave that would sweep across the world. The reason why he was unwilling to give in now, other than establishing his might, was to test the accuracy of the information that Ji Tian had revealed to him before he died. Sure enough, when he saw that Li Yueming wasn't willing to let it go, Ji Feng's eyes revealed a hint of coldness. She was the #1 prodigy of the world more than 7,000 years ago. Although she did not live as long as Ji Tian and did not have as great achievements as Ji Tian, she was also a down-to-earth nirvana expert at her peak. Even though he had fallen from nirvana many years ago due to his old age and exhaustion of energy. As a result, she could not continue to sleep like the other old monsters. She could only use some less dignified methods to prolong her light. However, it was difficult for her to tolerate a junior like Li Yueming who did not know how to advance or retreat in front of her. She might not be able to defeat Li Yueming. After all, even Ji Tian had fallen. This junior in front of him was definitely not an ordinary Nirvana realm expert. However, it didn't mean that she was really afraid of Li Yueming. Therefore, when she heard that Li Yueming refused to reconcile, Ji Feng's expression turned cold and she said indifferently, "Ella, in that case, what do you want? However, don't blame me for not reminding you in advance. Think carefully about your current situation. So what if he destroyed the Great Zhou, Great Qi, and all the other countries? As long as the people who set the order still existed, there would still be another Great Zhou if they were pushed to the side, and there would still be another Great Qi if they were pushed to the side." Hearing this, Li Yueming smiled. "Senior has a point. Actually, I don't want much. After all, the Qi army attacked our northern ice river town first, causing our northern ice river town to suffer heavy losses. Since the Great Qi is willing to repent now, there is no need to talk about compensating some money and food. The land that originally belonged to northern ice river town must also be returned. These conditions are not too much, right?" Li Yueming said that he didn't want much, and in fact, he didn't want much. He just wanted what he deserved back. Along the way, he extorted a huge sum of compensation. However, ceding territory and paying reparations was undoubtedly an extreme humiliation for a country. If Ji Feng really agreed, it was no different from giving Big Qi a few tight slaps in front of the entire world. Everyone present became nervous. He wanted to know if old ancestor Ji Feng would really agree. As for themselves, other than being afraid of death, they also had fear and hatred. When she heard Li Yueming's conditions, Ji Feng's turbid eyes narrowed, revealing a dangerous light. After a long silence, he said, "Big Qi has agreed. I hope you will take care of yourself in the future." When she said the words "take care of them," Ji Feng's tone clearly contained some anger, but Li Yueming seemed to not hear it at all. He laughed loudly and said, "Good, Senior is indeed reasonable. In that case, Junior will not disturb you." After saying that, he didn't stop. He turned around and disappeared from where he was. The entire Great Zhou Imperial Court fell into silence as they watched him leave. Obviously, no one present had expected such an earth-shattering event to have such a strong start but a weak end. In the end, it ended with Ji Feng lowering her head. 0. Such a big thing had happened. Even if the Qi tried their best to cover it up. However, he still could not escape the burning gazes of the onlookers all over the world. About a week later, Li Yueming openly barged into the palace of De Qi in broad daylight and threatened Ji Feng, the 16th ancestor of De Qi, in front of hundreds of important officials of De Qi. He also successfully forced Ji Feng to lower her head and the news of her ceding territory and compensation spread. It was unknown how much noise it caused. Back then, when Li Yueming killed Ji Tian and successfully wiped out the Great Zhou dynasty from its roots, the Great Zhou dynasty was still in chaos. The entire world was still shocked by the strength that Li Yueming had displayed. Now, they were amazed by Li Yueming's terrifying deterrence. In front of the only Nirvana refiner who could walk on the earth, the order established by the various countries was like a piece of waste paper. It could not form even the slightest restriction on him. If he charged into the palace alone, not only would he be able to return unscathed, but he would also be able to force the other party to lower his head. Li Yueming was probably the only person in the world who had the ability to do this. Under the instigation of this wind tide, everyone who didn't know the truth had the same question. Was Li Yueming the strongest in the world? There was no doubt about this. After all, the so-called geniuses of the younger generation were still hovering between the returning origin and the divine aperture realm. Only Li Yueming, who was extremely heaven-defying, had broken through nirvana and was about to face the ultimate difficulty of the 12th tribulation of Qi refinement, ascension. Therefore, it was better to ask another question. Was there anyone in the world who could stop Li Yueming? Chapter 652, Reunion, Return to Northern Ice River. 1. Li Yueming personally attacked and charged into the palace of De Qi alone. Not only did they not suffer the crazy siege of the Great Qi, but they also suppressed the great Qi, who had been arrogant and domineering for countless years, and lowered their heads. In order to give him an explanation, Ji Feng, the 16th ancestor of the Qi dynasty, had actually used her crutch to teach the current emperor of the Qi dynasty, Ji Hokan, a lesson in front of hundreds of Qi ministers. He even agreed to a few terms that no one would believe in on a normal day. This action shocked many people. The old hooligan was no longer a hooligan. He was taught a lesson by an even more hooligan leader, causing many people to cry out that their worldview was shattered and their youth was over. As a result, after this matter spread to the outside world, many Qi practitioners in the world doubted whether Li Yueming could represent the peak of Qi practitioners in this land, other than the human Emperor Tiandu clan who had ascended to the sky for more than 20,000 years. However, it seemed that there was no way to draw an accurate conclusion at the moment. After all, Li Yueming only had one battle record. Of course, these speculations were all under the circumstance that the outside world did not know that Li Yueming was still a Qi refiner in the heavenly tribulation realm. If they knew the truth, there would not be such a big argument. Li Yueming's combat power would be hung on the altar, and it would probably not fade for thousands of years. Point 0. The 9 kingdoms fought for hegemony and annexed each other's land to increase their strength. The person who won in the end would have the chance to become the second Huangtiandu clan from 10,000 years ago, and the country he belonged to would also be the next country to unify the 9 provinces. This war could be traced back to a very long time ago. As early as 10,000 years ago, when the human sovereign Tiandu clan disintegrated, the 9 sub-dynasties had already been preparing for this. There were also a few twists and turns along the way. There were empires that rose, and there were empires that fell. 5,000 years ago, Great Zhou, Great Qin, and a few other countries joined forces to attack Great Gan and its allies. That was why the original 9 sub-dynasties had combined into 6 sub-dynasties. But no matter what, in the past 20,000 years, there had never been a new force like the Star Moon Army, which had risen rapidly like a shooting star. It had withstood the immense pressure everywhere and found a way to break out of each dead end. In the end, he even successfully defeated the mighty empire. Ever since Li Yueming personally went to Deqi to make a move, the guys who originally wanted to take advantage of the chaos in northern Ice River Town to get a share of the loot suddenly stopped. There was no need to say much about Great Qin. A few months ago, after hearing Li Yueming's vicious words, the 9th prince, who had successfully ascended the throne, had already felt the danger. After all, the 9th prince should be the one who understood Li Yueming the most. Therefore, after hearing Li Yueming's ruthless words, he was shocked. The 9th prince did not even dare to say a word and immediately had Great Qin's army run back. This action had saved Great Qin from the terrifying consequences of Li Yueming finding them. As for the other countries, if there was any movement in the country indicating that they wanted to participate in this war against the Star Moon Army in northern Ice River Town, Li Yueming didn't let them go and extorted them one by one. When they first heard that the Emperor of Deqi was being taught a lesson, although the other countries did not say it explicitly on the surface, in reality, they all had the attitude of watching a joke. After all, I'm a dead Taoist, but I'm not a dead Daoist. Although Northern Glacier Town was indeed difficult to deal with. However, it was still a very refreshing thing to see his former opponent suffer a defeat. However, as Li Yueming went to look for them one by one, the expressions of the higher UPS of the various countries began to turn ugly. Was Li Yueming really crazy to a certain extent? The 6 hoodlums in the world, Dezhou, had been thoroughly punished by the Star Moon Army. Now, Li Yueming actually dared to provoke them? Was he not afraid of death? Fawebolo. However, no matter what the higher UPS of the various countries thought, in the end, under the pressure of the situation, he still pinched his nose and admitted defeat. After all, the ancestor could not be summoned just because he wanted to. The people who created and maintained order did not come out. No one dared to offend Li Yueming. Thus, Li Yueming strolled around the various countries like an emperor touring his backyard. Relying on his powerful individual combat strength, he had not only successfully resolved the situation where the various countries surrounded the Star Moon troop and were prepared to take a share of the loot. It even allowed Northern Glacier Town to make a fortune out of it. The compensation from the 5 nations included, but was not limited to, money, food, weapons, armor, and all kinds of priceless treasures. In addition, the Star Moon Army had also taken in a lot of the Great Zhou's foundation by breaking through Hejing City. The current Northern Ice River town could be said to be rich and powerful. After doing all this, Li Yueming heaved a sigh of relief. After so many years of painstaking planning, he had finally gotten such a happy ending. With the enemy in the sky still unknown, the only thing that could threaten him now was the group of old monsters who had established the current world order after the Tiandu dynasty collapsed. What he needed to do next was to further strengthen his strength. Chapter 653, Reunion, Return to Northern Ice River. 2. Of course, it would be even better if he could open another human treasure. Point 0. He settled the small tricks of the other 5 countries. Li Yueming didn't need to worry about other trivial matters. Therefore, after this trip, Li Yueming did not go to Hejing but chose to return to Northern Glacier Town. This was also the first time he had returned to Northern Glacier Town after several decades. On a winter afternoon, the wind and snow were still howling, and the entire world was white. Li Yueming's figure appeared alone outside North Glacier Town. Looking at the huge town that stood on the snow-white sky not far away, Li Yueming's emotions became complicated. He still remembered that the first time he came here, it was also snowing. At that time, Northern Ice River Town was just a poor and run-down village with less than 10,000 people. Perhaps even the people who had followed him in the construction would not have thought that in less than 100 years, a poor and run-down village like Northern Glacier Town had blossomed into a shocking flower on this black land of ice and snow. The current Northern Ice River Town had developed into a super metropolis with a permanent population of more than 5 million. The size of the town stretched along the 2 sides of the Northern Ice River for more than 300 kilometers. It was even once called the Pearl of the North, Paradise on Earth and Pure Land of Reincarnation. Here, a human could obtain the rights that belonged to a human. As long as they were willing to work, anyone could receive a fair reward. If one were to ask the people in the Northwest who was the founder of this city, they would probably answer the name Li Yueming in unison. Only Li Yueming himself didn't feel much of a sense of participation. This city was indeed the embodiment of his painstaking efforts. In the beginning, many houses were built by him, brick by brick. However, these were not worth mentioning to Li Yueming. He had only created a stage where he could lead a better life. Most of it was still based on the joint efforts of the people in the Northwest. In other words, what really made this city beautiful and shining was the tireless pursuit of a good life by everyone in this world. That was why the creativity of humans was always so incredible. If time was really a ruler that was so long that no matter could observe it, then without a tiny but tenacious life like human, the scales on the ruler would probably become much more boring. Li Yueming stood outside the city for a long time. Finally, he patted the white snowflakes on his shoulders and walked toward the entrance of the city. Seeing that he was hurrying through the wind and snow, an old woman riding a cow kindly gave him an oil paper umbrella on the way. They walked to the city gate. Li Yueming suddenly stopped in his tracks. Not far away on the official road, there were also a few figures waiting with oil paper umbrellas. The moment he stopped, the few figures at the entrance of the official road also saw him. After being stunned for a moment, they pounced on him almost at the same time. The first to rush over was Li Ruyu. She hugged Li Yueming and touched his hair. With tears in her eyes, she murmured, "Little brother, where have you been all these years? Did you suffer? Big sis, have you been slacking off on your cultivation for me all these years?" Li Yueming shook his head and smiled. Li Ruyu didn't say anything and tightened her grip on him. Tears could not help but fall. Because of all sorts of reasons, there were always more and less of them. He thought that after becoming stronger and more powerful, he would be able to settle down and the days of reunion would be longer and longer. However, he did not expect that not only did the separation not become shorter, but it also became longer and longer. Li Ruya was still in her prime before they parted. However, after so many years, her child was almost at the age of marriage. How could she still be young? Time is easy to grow old, youth is easy to pass away. Only time is still. Although she was reluctant, Li Ruya knew that there were still people behind her. Therefore, after embracing for a moment, Li Ruya took a few steps back and made space for Li Ruxing. Li Ruxing, who had always been serious and cold all these years, had red eyes at this moment. He glanced at Li Ruya and then at Li Yueming. He rolled his eyes and said, "It's fine that sister snatched my position, but she even snatched my lines. I have nothing to say. It's good that you're back." Li Ziyu smiled. Li Ruxing's personality was just like that. He was extremely careless and off-topic. Crying was not her style. This world might be fake, but it was real. Therefore, Li Yueming took the initiative to hug Li Ruxing and said, "With a younger brother like me, second sister, you probably won't have much free time in your life. If he didn't find a brother-in-law, he might become a lonely old man." Li Ruxing, whose eyes were still red, burst into tears when he heard this. He punched Li Yueming's shoulder and said, "You heartless little thing. You've made your second sister worry for so many years, and you're still trying to provoke me when you've just returned, right?" She finally wiped her tears and took a few steps back. She smiled and said, "Little brother, this is your eldest sister's son and also your nephew, Qin Zhouling." He looked at his uncle, who only existed in legends. Chapter 654, Reunion, Return to Northern Ice River. 3. After so many reincarnations, if Li Yueming still had any weaknesses, then how to deal with the relationship with his immediate family was definitely the biggest shortcoming. According to tradition, elders should prepare gifts to express their love and blessings when they met their juniors for the first time. However, Li Yueming didn't think so much before coming, so he didn't prepare anything. After thinking for a while, Li Yueming took out a book from his pocket and handed it to Qin Zhouling. "Uncle came in a hurry and didn't prepare any presentable gifts. However, I heard that you are very talented in cultivation. Let's see if this thing suits you." Qin Zhouling glanced at the book in Li Yueming's hand and swallowed her saliva. "Uncle, is this a martial arts manual?" Li Ruxing patted his head from behind and said, "With a martial arts secret manual? If you learn it, you will be able to do whatever you want in this world, just like your uncle." Upon hearing this, Qin Zhouling was overjoyed. She took the book and said, "Thank you, uncle. I will definitely cultivate well." In this world, there was always a shackle that time could not cut off. Li Ruxing, Li Ruyu, Li Nanfan. These were all existences that Li Yueming couldn't let go of in this world. Therefore, even at such a critical juncture, Li Yueming still took some time to accompany them. Of course, he said that he would accompany them. But in fact, Li Yueming spent the most effort on his nephew, Qin Zhouling. Under the deliberate guidance of Li Ruxing and Li Ruyu, Qin Zhouling would come to Li Yueming every day to ask questions about cultivation. Especially the martial arts manual that Li Yueming gave him, it was too obscure and difficult to understand. Even Qin Zhouling, who had always been recognized as a genius, was often confused. He could only take advantage of the fact that his uncle was still present to ask for advice. Li Yueming was not stingy with this. Basically, as long as he could answer, he would tell him everything he knew. He could not be the only powerful qi refiner in Northern Ice River Town. He would not be able to walk steadily with a limp. Therefore, the problem of nurturing powerful qi refiners in the future had to be raised sooner or later. FREWBNV What Li Yueming was doing now was just a rehearsal. Just like that, more than 2 months passed. In a quaint courtyard, Li Yueming easily repelled Qin Huling's sword. Looking at his nephew who was sweating profusely and panting, Li Yueming casually pointed out, "Ella, in the path of cultivation, cultivating the qi is not everything. You have to pay more attention to the cultivation of your body and mind. This is the foundation of the strength of the strong." Qin Zhouling sat on the ground. Looking at Li Yueming who was still not blushing or panting, he said breathlessly, "Elle can't take it anymore, uncle." He broke through to the true form realm at 18 and focused at 20. He was one of the top geniuses in the world. He was also Li Ruyu's son and the future successor of the West Garrison Fortress. It could be said that he was born as a proud son of heaven. Over the years, who knew how many people had flattered him? Thanks to Li Ruyu's good education, he knew that these compliments and flattery were not sincere. However, he was still a young man after all. Growing up in such an environment would still produce a little frivolous and domineering mentality. Therefore, although Qin Zhouling would not emphasize her talent and hard work on the surface, she had always been proud of it. However, in front of Li Yueming, this so-called genius was like a chicken without any resistance. Li Yueming had clearly not used any spiritual power, but he was still able to torture him to death. Such a huge blow made him doubt his life for a moment. Uncle's combat ability was simply unreasonable. How did he do it? Li Yueming opened his mouth and was about to say something when he saw his autistic nephew. But at that moment, he suddenly felt a familiar yet unfamiliar presence. Frowning, Li Yueming put down his sword. "Experience it yourself. There are guests outside. Uncle will go and entertain them." Qin Zhouling also opened her mouth to say something, but when she opened her mouth, she found that she was out of breath and couldn't even speak. She could only wave her hand to indicate that there was no problem. He still didn't know why Li Yueming was so powerful. However, he remembered what second mother had told him. As long as he could cultivate seriously according to the martial arts secret manual given by his uncle, the path in this world would be unimpeded for him. Li Yueming glanced at him and said nothing more. He turned around and left. Everyone has their own way. All he could do was lead the way. As for how to go and how far she could go, that would depend on Qin Huling's own luck. Chapter 655, Ancient Classics, Spreading to the World. 1. Clang. 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 Someone knocked on the door. Li Yueming walked to the courtyard and opened the door. Wang Ziwei, who was dressed in cotton clothes and looked travel-worn, stood at the door. His shoulders were still stained with some snowflakes. "Teacher, why are you here?" Li Yueming asked. However, even though he asked this question, Li Yueming had already guessed the other party's intention. "Are you Vel.M?" Back then, Li Yueming managed to dig out the hidden quest Overthrow the Great Zhou from Wang Ziwei. It was precisely because of this hidden quest that Li Yueming was even more determined to deal with the Great Zhou. This was because he had worked hard on this matter for so many years, and he did not know how many hardships he had encountered along the way. It was only until now that Li Yueming managed to complete it. However, after completing the mission, Li Yueming himself was too obsessed with being enemies with the location, so he forgot about the hidden mission reward. Wang Ziwei must have specially come to find him for this matter. Wang Ziwei didn't say anything. He just raised his head and sized up Li Yueming. There wasn't much change from the last time they met, but the aura on his body had become deeper and bottomless. Wang Ziwei shook the snow off his shoulders and smiled. "Why, are you surprised?" Hearing his answer, Li Yueming finally reacted. He stepped aside and made a gesture of invitation. "It's been a long time since I've heard any news about teacher. I've been worried." Wang Ziwei slowly walked into the courtyard. After looking around, he said, "The matter I'm looking for you for is very important." "Who's that in your back hall?" Li Yueming replied, "He's the nephew of the student." Wang Ziwei nodded and felt relieved. After closing the door, the two of them walked from the front hall to the living room. Li Yueming respectfully poured a cup of tea for Wang Ziwei. With Li Yueming's current status and identity, however, Wang Ziwei could clearly predict one of them. Wang Ziwei leaned closer to the teacup and blew at the steam coming out of it. When the tea had relaxed a little, he did not stand on ceremony and picked up the cup to drink it in one gulp. After drinking the tea, Wang Ziwei heaved a sigh of relief. Before Li Yueming could ask, he took out 2 yellowed books and a few pages of torn paper from his pocket and handed them to Li Yueming. This is the original version of the Book of Changes that was passed down from the ancient Deduction era. Most of its contents were lost in the era of the human sovereign Tiando clan. This first book was found in an ancient ruin when I was traveling around the world. It was also because of this book that I was able to open the path of cultivation and become a chi refiner. As he spoke, Wang Ziwei handed the first yellowed ancient book to Li Yueming. Then, he took the second ancient book and the remaining fragments and continued, "After I heard that you were assassinated, I have been searching everywhere for you all these years. This ancient book and tattered scroll were collected by me on the way to find you. They are also remnants of the ancient Book of Changes, but these are more damaged and can only be used as a reference." After he finished speaking, Wang Ziwei did not hesitate and handed the 2 ancient books to Li Yueming. Looking at the heavy ancient book in his hand, Li Yueming finally understood why there was no information about Wang Ziwei all these years. It turned out that not only was Wang Ziwei helping him collect the remnants of the Book of Changes, he was also looking for him everywhere. Li Yueming was a little touched. The masters of this world were not like the masters of some other worlds. There was still a true master-disciple relationship. After handing all these things over to Li Yueming, Wang Ziwei seemed to heave a heavy sigh of relief, but his expression soon became serious again. He said, "When I was searching for the remnants of the Book of the Yield, I found something else. There's a problem with our current cultivation system. The human emperor of the Tiando clan tampered with the Book of Changes. Drawing qi into the body was not the cultivation method of the ancient cultivators. During the Great Jian dynasty, the experts who cultivated the Book of Changes were called cultivators. Cultivators can also fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. When they grow up, their strength will be hundreds or thousands of times stronger than a key refiner." Speaking of this, Wang Ziwei looked excited. In addition to his excitement, there was also a deep fear in the depths of his eyes. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said with a trembling voice, "According to what I've found out over the years, the human emperor Tiando clan is definitely not that simple. He must have some ulterior motive for creating this abnormal cultivation system." Li Yueming didn't say anything throughout the whole process. He just listened quietly. Wang Ziwei himself should also be the son of fate who had received the blessing of heaven and earth. Since he already had a book fragment of the Book of Changes, he would have more clues than ordinary people if he continued to search for other fragments of the Book of Changes. In addition, his own strength was not weak, so it was normal for him to be able to investigate some things. The only thing that Li Yueming did not expect was that he actually found the difference between the cultivation system of the ancient Great Jian dynasty and the current cultivation system. Even Li Yueming had only made a vague guess and had not found any concrete evidence. After saying all this, Wang Ziwei silently observed the changes in Li Yueming's expression. He realized that Li Yueming was silent throughout the entire process. There was no expression of surprise, shock, or disbelief on his face. Chapter 656, Ancient Classics, Spreading to the World. 2. Li Yueming was silent for a long time. After making a draft in his heart, he said word by word, "Teacher, this world is a cage. You and I are all prisoners. As for who is controlling all of this behind the scenes, not to mention that I don't have a definite answer for the time being, even if I really do, I can't tell anyone." Looking at the quiet Li Yueming in front of him, Wang Ziwei was obviously stunned. After a moment, he suddenly smiled and said, "Yes, yes, yes." As soon as he finished speaking, the two of them fell silent. Wang Ziwei was no longer in the mood to continue chatting. He opened the door of the living room and took a few steps out in the wind and snow. Suddenly, he turned around and said, "Even in my dreams, I wanted to destroy the Great Zhou, but I didn't expect that this matter would be done by a disciple like you. Lve lost my goal to work hard for. I guess this is the end of my life. I hope these things can help you." After saying this, Wang Ziwei did not look back and disappeared through the door in the wind and snow. Come in the snow, leave in the snow. Only a few broken books and the fading footprints at the door proved that he had really been here. Li Yueming stood at the door and watched Wang Ziwei leave. He knew that if nothing unexpected happened, this would probably be the last time the master and disciple would meet. When Wang Ziwei's figure completely disappeared, Li Yueming then closed the door and opened the remnant of the Book of Changes in his hand to study. 0. Spring passed and autumn came in northern Glacier Town. Time flowed like water into the sea and never returned. It had to be said that Northern Glacier Town was probably the most experienced governing body in the world in terms of how to pacify the land after the war and re-establish order. After spending about 2 years, the entire regime of the Great Zhou was basically taken over by Northern Glacier Town. At this point, if the two old monsters that Ji Tian had mentioned did not wake up, the Great Zhou dynasty would have been completely destroyed, both in reality and in name. Northern Glacier Town took over the order of the entire Great Zhou territory and began to reform this devastated land in an orderly manner. After enduring the painful period of the first 2 years, the Great Zhou towns under the command of Northern Glacier Town had begun to regain their vitality in the 3rd year. After dealing with the most difficult problem, next was the expansion of Northern Glacier Town and the change of its name. Northern Glacier Town was the capital that the Star Moon Army had initially established. Previously, they could still use this title when they were in the northwest. Now that the Star Moon Army had already broken through the capital of Great Zhou, it would be a little unclear if they continued to call him by this name. Therefore, after a heated discussion among the higher UPS of the Star Moon Army, they unanimously decided to change the new name to the Star Moon Empire. The proposal passed through multiple rounds of review and was finally placed in front of Li Yueming's case. After Li Yueming saw it, he couldn't help but laugh. Star Moon, Star Moon. This seemed to have become the exclusive symbol of his activities in the various reincarnation worlds. Basically, every world would be simplified at the end, condensed into the 2 characters that were closely related to him, the star and moon. Of course, he did not reject it. He just let his subordinates do as they saw fit. After all, most of his energy was currently focused on studying the remnant of the Book of Changes. According to Wang Ziwei's description, the Book of Changes was one of the highest scriptures practiced by the natives of this world during the ancient Deduction era. The individual's power during the ancient Deduction era was not as simple as qi refinement as it was now. It was a combination of body tempering and qi refinement. Cultivate the Book of Changes to the extreme. Not only could he see the endless mysteries of the world, but he could also obtain the powerful power to travel through space. In other words, the so-called peak of glory in the ancient Great Jian dynasty should be a powerful civilization of immortal cultivators. Judging from the fact that they could travel through space, the ancient Deduction might have opened up more than one world. It was a pity that Li Yueming had obtained the incomplete volume of the Book of Changes. There was no complete cultivation plan recorded on it. Moreover, because the incomplete volume was too powerful, even the infinite deduction talent could not completely restore it. Li Yueming could only imagine the whole picture through a limited view. Then, the problem came. Since the ancient Deduction dynasty was so powerful, it might even be an advanced civilization that had established other worlds as their breeding grounds. Why was it suddenly destroyed overnight? How powerful was the hand behind all this? Li Yueming didn't know, and he had no way of knowing. The only thing he knew was that through studying and deducing the incomplete book of the Book of Changes, he had successfully broken through the Nirvana realm, and his understanding of the human body had become deeper. If he continued to delve deeper into it, he might even be able to unlock a brand new human body treasure. This was the most realistic thing for Li Yueming. Otherwise, even the old monsters of the 6 nations would not be able to resist. So what if he knew the true intentions of the mastermind? It was useless. Point 0. Many major events had happened in the past year. The first to bear the brunt was naturally the inevitable relocation of the Star Moon Army headquarters from North Ice River Town to Hejing. Chapter 657, Ancient Classics, Spreading to the World. 3. On the day of the name change ceremony, the current actual ruler of the Star Moon dynasty, Li Yueming, personally went on stage to inspect the famous Star Moon Army. It attracted the attention of all the major factions in the world. Secondly, some Qi practitioners could acutely sense that the spiritual energy in the world had become thinner than usual. In the beginning, many Qi practitioners thought that it was just an illusion. However, when more and more people realized the seriousness of the problem, it caused a huge uproar in the world. What's wrong with this damn heavens? Why is the spiritual energy so thin? Damn it, I was almost at the foundation establishment realm, but the spiritual energy became so thin that I still haven't accumulated enough spiritual energy to break through. Damn it, why is this happening? Could it be that the world has dried up? He felt that the cultivation environment was becoming more and more severe. The Qi refiners outside became increasingly uneasy. The land of the 9 prefectures had never been so restless. It was also at this moment. There were some rumors spreading in the outside world. Some people said that the reason why the spiritual energy was suddenly so thin was because the old monsters who had established the order of the various countries were awakening one after another. There were more and more powerful Qi practitioners in this world, and the other weak Qi practitioners naturally became more and more difficult to survive. Without a doubt. After this news spread, it set off a new wave of frenzy. Many Qi practitioners felt indignant and uneasy at the same time. The emergence of powerful Qi refiners meant that the living environment of the lower-level Qi refiners would become even worse. This was not good news for most people. Of course, at the same time, people all over the world were curious about the accuracy of this news and who these old monsters who set the rules were. The hustle and bustle disturbed the already restless hearts of the people, but it did not affect Li Yueming, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground in the courtyard. Ever since Wang Ziwei had given him the remnant of the Book of Changes, he had almost never left this room. During this period, Li Ruxing and Li Ruyu came to look for him several times. She realized that he had only chatted for a while after cultivating and left. The one who was most unwilling to be left out was his nephew Qin Zhouling. Ever since he found out that there was always someone better than him, and that his uncle was better than the heavens, this guy often pestered Li Yueming. Li Yueming had no choice but to take some time out of his cultivation to teach him some knowledge. One day, the withered trees in the courtyard were sprouting, and the green leaves contained the power of life. Qin Zhouling stood under the tree and looked at Li Yueming. "Uncle, can I teach others what you taught me?" Li Yueming, who was in a mental state, asked in confusion, "Teach who?" Qin Zhouling shrank her head and didn't dare to speak. After a while, she gathered her courage and gritted her teeth. "Answer me first." Li Yueming glanced at him and replied, "This is your own business. Why are you asking me? Learn your skills first. Don't embarrass uncle when you go out." Seeing that he didn't refute or even get angry, Qin Zhouling said in disbelief, "Really? If I were to teach all the people of the world your hard work, would you scold me for being an ingrate?" Looking at the young man in front of him, whose face was full of anxiety but whose eyes were shining, Li Yueming was suddenly stunned. After a long while, he said, "Why do you have such thoughts?" Upon hearing this, Qin Zhouling put away the sword in her hand and answered matter-of-factly, because the dream of Northern Glacier Town has never been to repeat those boring cycles of history. Instead, we should try our best to jump out of the historical cycle and let the glory of human nature last for a long time. This is what you once said. Have you forgotten? Chapter 658, The Ancestor Arrives, The Battle of Nirvana. 1. Qin's Huling's name was changed to Su Zhouling, and the surname of the Northwest King was wrong. The ideal calendar was changed to the Northern Ice River calendar. Su Zhouling wanted to teach the cultivation method on the land of the Northwest and promote the cultivation method that Li Yueming taught him to the world. When he said it, even Li Yueming was shocked. He didn't expect his nephew to be so broad-minded. After obtaining the treasure, the first thing he thought of was not to hide it and enjoy it alone, but to spread it to benefit the world. It's rare for you to have such an idea, Li Yueming said with a smile. The method can be promoted. However, the time is not ripe yet. Moreover, not everyone can cultivate these techniques. One needs to be very talented to comprehend the profundities within. So even if you want to spread it, you can only benefit a small number of people. Wait for a while. Let your parents and second aunt clear the obstacles first. When you grow up, the time will be ripe. Su Zhouling clenched her fists and said, "Yes, yes. I will cultivate well." As he spoke, he looked at Li Yueming with excitement in his eyes. Usually, his uncle would only correct him when he made a mistake in his cultivation. However, this time, his uncle said a lot of things to him. This meant that uncle must have some plans for these things in his heart. The dream of Northern Ice River Town, which was treated as a joke by everyone, was now slowly blossoming under the catalyst of time. All that was left was a warm spring breeze, and everything in this world would change drastically. 0. Since the demise of the Great Zhou, the countries that had been in conflict with each other seemed to have been forced to press the stop button, and suddenly fell into a deathly silence. During the Six Nations War, in order to unify the world and become the uncrowned king, these countries almost beat their brains out. A small fight every 3 days and a big fight every 5 days. The world was filled with smoke. But now, the world was extremely quiet. Other than the Qi refiners who were making a ruckus because they sensed that the Reiki was decreasing, there was almost no incident at the national level. Someone observed these abnormalities and put forward an opinion: Northern Ice River Town destroyed the Great Zhou dynasty and established the Star Moon Empire. The other 5 nations actually didn't make any moves? It's really strange. Under normal circumstances, Northern Glacier Town's act of self-proclaimed king without the consent of the other 5 countries would not be recognized by the other countries. If it was not done well, it would even cause a great upheaval in the world's order. Even if Northern Glacier Town was strong enough, and Li Yueming was one of the few strong people in the world, the other 5 countries should not have no reaction at all. However, the truth was right here. The other 5 nations didn't have much of a reaction to the change of name of Northern Ice River Town to Star Moon Dynasty, which was a blatant violation of the order after the collapse of the Tiandu dynasty. They didn't agree or condemn it. From the outside world's perspective, this was actually similar to tacit consent. Who knows? Li Yueming was probably too strong, and the other countries really couldn't do anything to him. I don't think so. Let's not talk about the Great Zhou first. The Great Qin and Great Ming are great countries that have been passed down since the era of the human emperor Tiandu clan. That's right. Although the number of Nirvana realm experts is definitely not many, there are definitely not only these few who appeared on the surface. Wasn't there a rumor some time ago? The reason why the spiritual energy was exhausted was that the ancestors of all countries were in the process of awakening. Those existences were all earth-shattering demons. The existences who established the world order after the Tiandu dynasty disintegrated. Could it be that they were going to appear on this land again? If that's really the case, I feel like my scalp is about to explode. To be able to see so many big shots on the same stage in my lifetime, I really have no regrets. Many Qi practitioners and the higher UPS of various countries were discussing this matter, and the final conclusion was relatively unified: the other 5 nations would never acknowledge the status of Northern Ice River Town, nor would they be able to do so. After all, whether it was Li Yueming or North Glacier Town, they were out of place in the 6 nations. If the other 5 countries were the remnants of the previous era, then the other 5 countries were the remnants of the previous era. Then the newly risen Northern Ice River Town would be the new wave that was about to crush the previous wave. Both sides had completely different interests and spiritual beliefs. There was no chance for them to shake hands and make peace. Either the other 5 nations would be defeated or the Star Moon Troop would be defeated. There was no third kind of possibility. In fact, this was indeed the case. It was still the beginning of spring, the season when all things burst forth. In an uninhabited temple outside Hejing, the former capital of the Great Zhou, 2 extremely terrifying auras suddenly appeared. Chapter 659, The Ancestor Arrives, The Battle of Nirvana. 2. Compared to the white-robed old man's friendliness, the fierce-looking grey-robed old man on the right was not in such a good mood. He swept his gaze in the direction of Jiajing City and said angrily, "This group of unfilial prodigals really deserve to die. They just had to make such a mess at this moment. Ancestor, do you still have enough lifespan?" Although the grey-robed old man's words and actions were domineering, he was clearly a little reserved when facing the white-robed old man. At this moment, he was carefully probing the aura of the white-robed old man. The white-robed old man smiled and waved his hand with a slightly waning interest. He shook his head and said, "Forget it, it's time and fate. I'm probably destined to never ascend in this life. There's nothing bad about returning to dust as soon as possible." Hearing this, the grey-robed old man's eyes flickered with some sadness. Cultivation itself was to obtain true freedom in the world. However, in order to obtain the qualification to ascend to the sky, they were confined to a dark and narrow space. Every day, they struggled to survive with secret techniques. They had suffered in the human world for nearly 10,000 years. If not for the fact that they could still see hope in the future, they might have been freed from this pain long ago. He wouldn't be like this now, neither human nor ghost. However, they had already paid such a huge price. The ascension plan that they had formulated 10,000 years ago was destroyed by an unknown junior when they were about to get on the right track, causing all their efforts to fall short. Who could know the anger and resentment in it? The grey-robed old man sighed and did not say anything else. He turned to look at the distant north and said coldly, "Since you dare to shatter our dream of ascension, you must be prepared to suffer my monstrous anger, right? Ancestor, let's go. Let's go and see how monstrous this junior is. He's actually worthy of coming down personally and awakening so many of us at the same time." The white-robed old man's expression was very complicated, but in the end, he only sighed faintly and said briefly and forcefully, "Good." At the same time, the Great Qin, Great Qi, Great Ming, Great Tang, and even the unremarkable Great Song began to step out. These figures were tall, short, energetic, and listless. But all of them had a common characteristic. That meant that he was very old. This group of elders came from all directions, but in the end, they all walked on the same path. Looking at the figures beside him, someone in the roadside, Elle didn't expect to be fortunate enough to be able to travel with so many legendary seniors today. LT seemed that this junior was really not simple. Clearly, this person also had a great background. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to accurately identify certain people in this group of people. Unfortunately, no one paid any attention to his praise. Everyone only silently looked at Northern Glacier Town, which was now clearly visible in front of them. In Northern Ice River Town, Li Yueming, who was meditating in the courtyard, felt something. He looked in the direction of the south gate of North Glacier Town. At this moment, Su Zhouling was still cultivating in the courtyard. Li Ruya was busy cooking in the kitchen. Li Ruxing leaned against the chair in the front yard and read a book. Meanwhile, Li Nanfen was accompanying Li Ruyu's second youngest son. Although the family did not chat, they seemed to be very harmonious and happy when they were together. However, Li Yueming knew that this hard-won peace should be completely over at this moment. The battles that he was going to face next would be more difficult than the previous one. He stood up silently. Although his every move was very light, everyone present was a person with sensitive five senses. Therefore, the moment his body moved, several gazes looked at him. Li Nanfen stopped teasing his grandson and looked at Li Yueming. "Son, what's wrong?" Li Yueming shook his head. "It's nothing. I might have something to do. I can't come back for dinner today." Li Nanfen frowned. His intuition told him that everything was not as simple as Li Yueming said. But now, he was still old and could no longer keep up with his son's pace, so he could only nod and say, "Be careful." Li Yueming nodded slightly to indicate that he understood. At this moment, only Li Ruxing, who was sitting at the door reading a book, clearly felt that something was wrong. However, she stood up without saying anything. She just took a coat and put it on Li Yueming. She said softly, "Go early and come back early." Li Yueming took the coat and put it on his body. His eyes quickly swept across everyone, as if he wanted to deeply engrave their every frown and smile in his mind. Without any delay, he disappeared from the courtyard without looking back. Outside the south gate of North Ice River Town, Li Yueming appeared in a flash. He looked at the dozen or so white-haired old men at the door and said, "I've waited for you all for so many years." The group of people looked at Li Yueming with curiosity and coldness in their eyes. The grey-robed old man took the lead and said, "Young man, were you the one who destroyed the Great Zhou?" Chapter 660, The Ancestor Arrives, The Battle of Nirvana. 3. Sensing the other party's aura that was as deep as an abyss, the grey-robed old man's eyes revealed a solemn expression. He nodded and said, "Not bad. You have some spirit. However, we have so many fallen leaves. Did you sweep it clean?" "I don't know. You guys can try." Li Yueming shrugged. The grey-robed old man glanced at North Glacier Town behind Li Yueming, then at Li Yueming who was standing on the city wall. He said, "The city you built is not bad. It's a pity to destroy it. Let's change the battlefield. Thank you for showing mercy, seniors." Li Yueming nodded. To be able to reach their current level, it was not enough to be ruthless and decisive. They must also have their own style of doing things and corresponding persistence. Now, there was a town where countless ordinary people lived behind Li Yueming. If they attacked here, they would definitely uproot the entire town and smash it into pieces. Although the grey-robed old man wanted to kill Li Yueming immediately, he did not want to commit such a crime for no reason. Even though both sides were mortal enemies. However, just based on this bearing, Li Yueming was willing to lower his head and call them seniors. Someone in the crowd sneered in disdain. It was obvious that he did not care about this kind of nonsense. But in the end, no one made a move. The reason why the Great Zhou dynasty could prosper for so many years and occupy the most fertile and core land among the 6 dynasties was that the Great Zhou dynasty had been able to obtain the most prosperous land in the world. It was because the Great Zhou had 3 existences at the same level as them. This was also the most important reason why the Great Zhou's authority was higher than the other countries. Although Jitian, the weakest among them, was dead, the grey-robed old man and the white-robed old man were still the top experts among them. No one dared to ignore their feelings. Li Yueming led the way. The ancestors of the various countries followed closely behind. In just a few breaths, both parties had crossed thousands of miles and arrived at the wilderness outside the 100,000 Mountains. This was the border between the 100,000 Mountains and the northwest. There might not be anyone within 1,000 miles. FAWBOLO. No one would have thought that such a battle that would go down in history would be held in such a desolate mountain area without a single witness. After entering the mountain, Li Yueming used his human body treasure to sense around. After confirming that there was no one else in the surrounding thousands of miles, he stopped and said, "Let's start here. Let the younger generation take a good look and see if the seniors still have the bravery of the past." As he spoke, Li Yueming's gaze swept across everyone calmly. Finally, it landed on the grey-robed old man and the white-robed old man. Although time had changed too many things. However, Li Yueming could still vaguely recognize that these two were Emperor Wen, Ji Fengjiu, who had single-handedly founded the Great Zhou, and Emperor Wu, Ji Wu, who had unparalleled combat strength. Whether it was in terms of historical status or personal achievements, these two were the only two existences who could suppress Dragon Emperor Ji Tian. As for the other elders, Li Yueming could only recognize a few of them based on their portraits. After all, he was born in the Great Zhou, so he naturally had the deepest understanding of the Great Zhou. Chapter 661, A Chaotic Battle, A Narrow Escape. 1. At the edge of the 100,000 mountains, there was no one for 1,000 miles. Li Yueming and the ancestors of the various countries stood on top of each other and confronted each other. The terrifying aura that erupted from each other made all the birds and beasts that lived here within 1,000 miles run away. No living creature could remain unmoved under such a terrifying aura. Looking at the fearless Li Yueming, Ji Wu walked out of the crowd and said, "This old man will first test your depth and see if your strength is worthy of your arrogance." There were a total of 12 ancestors who came to kill Li Yueming. On average, there were 2 ancestors in deep sleep in each country. The weakest among them was in existence above nirvana. Those who were lower than this realm, such as Ji Feng of the Qi Kingdom, were not worthy of sleeping side by side with them after falling into nirvana. And now, they had been ordered to move out in full force. However, in the end, everyone was still a legendary figure who had left a deep mark in history. Naturally, they all had their own pride. If there was no need, they would disdain a group of people to attack a junior like Li Yueming. The great Zhou martial emperor, Ji Wu, was the first to stand up and express his desire to test Li Yueming's strength. The others tacitly opened up a path and spread out to seal off the surroundings of the battlefield in case Li Yueming escaped. Li Yueming didn't say anything. The monk could run, but the temple could not. Since he was here, he had no intention of escaping. Looking at the old man in grey robes who had a rotten smell, Li Yueming said calmly, "How much effort does it take to do them one by one? It might be safer to attack together." Hearing that Li Yueming still dared to provoke him at such a time, the expressions of all the ancestors present changed. However, Li Yueming obviously had no intention of continuing to talk nonsense with them. The aura of Nirvana realm and human body treasure burst out without reservation. This terrifying aura that was as strong as the sky made everyone's faces change. Ji Wu, who was the first to bear the brunt of this, widened his eyes in disbelief. According to the information they received, although Li Yueming was able to defeat Ji Tian at his peak a few years ago, he must have paid a heavy price. This was also the biggest reason why the ancestors of the various countries could be so calm. After all, Ji Tian's strength could only be considered to be in the middle to lower class among them. Li Yueming could barely defeat Ji Tian, but most of the people present were stronger than Ji Tian. Even if he fought alone, Yu Mingming might not be able to defeat anyone present. However, the terrifying aura they felt from Li Yueming did not seem to be just a little stronger than Ji Tian's. It was too late to say, but it was too fast. Ji Wu's mind was filled with doubts, but Li Yueming's figure still rushed over at lightning speed. He was so fast that even the group of top-notch experts could only sense his blurry afterimage and could not see his figure completely. Plop! As the two figures crossed paths, they exchanged thousands of blows in an instant. Suddenly, a muffled groan sounded, and the contest between the two sides in the sky came to an abrupt end. Ji Wu was sent flying thousands of meters away. Li Yueming did not hold back at all. He used his strongest strength in his normal form, and a huge amount of spiritual energy was attached to his fists. After sending Ji Wu flying, the remaining power of his fist didn't dissipate completely. Instead, it formed a ripple-like swirl of spiritual energy, which swept out and uprooted many hundred-year-old trees under his feet. Just the aftermath of one punch had turned the battlefield into a mess. The strength of this punch was evident from this. Fortunately, the surrounding spectators were all experts of the same realm. Otherwise, if it were any existence with a slightly lower realm, the aftershock of the exchange just now would probably be enough to make them miserable. Jiwoo flew back thousands of meters like a kite with a broken string. Jiwoo finally steadied himself and wiped the blood off the corner of his mouth. Instead of checking his wounds, he looked as if he had seen a ghost and said in shock, "Is this your true strength? You didn't use your full strength when you fought against Ji Tianshang." It was no wonder that he was so incredulous. Li Yueming's current combat strength was too supermodel. It was only a few moves, but he was actually able to seriously injure him. What did this mean? This meant that the combat strength between the two sides was not on the same level at all. However, Jiwoo believed that he had already reached the peak of the Qi refinement realm in this world. Even if a powerful cultivator of the same realm could defeat him, he would have to pay a huge price. Then the question was, how could this young man suppress him so easily when they were of the same realm? Could it be that he had been asleep for too long, and the power in his body had drained over time? Compared to the physical blow, the spiritual blow was the most unacceptable to Jiwoo. Jiwoo's clothes were torn and he looked like he had lost his soul. Li Yueming stood still and did not continue to pursue. Chapter 662, A Chaotic Battle, A Narrow Escape. 2. The other patriarchs who were eyeing him covetously wouldn't let him kill Jiwoo in front of everyone. Therefore, after hearing Jiwoo's question, Li Yueming didn't continue to attack. He explained seriously, "It's not that I've been hiding my strength. It's just that I've become stronger again." Back when he was still in the heavenly tribulation realm, Li Yueming was already able to rely on his human body treasure and perfect genetic body to defeat Ji Tian at his peak. Now, Li Yueming had broken through the heavenly tribulation realm and reached the peak of nirvana. Moreover, because he had been constantly deducing and cultivating the Book of Changes over the years, Li Yueming's understanding of the human body's treasures had become more and more profound. His understanding of the Dao and Dharma of this world was also much stronger than a few years ago. In many aspects, even Li Yueming himself was not sure where his current limit was. In any case, to him, it was nothing more than betting his life on this battle. As for the outcome, only the heavens knew. Hearing Li Yueming's answer, Jiwoo and the other great ancestors gasped. A few years ago, when they were forced to wake up by the order, they still did not understand why he wanted to wake all of them who were sleeping. But now, he could feel the terrifying demonic power in Li Yueming's body. The group of people finally understood. This guy was a complete pervert. Under normal circumstances, after breaking through nirvana, every step forward was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. However, how long had it been since Li Yueming died? His combat strength had actually soared to such a level. His growth rate was too shocking. After a short fight, Jiwoo suffered a great loss in Li Yueming's hands. This result stunned all the ancestors present. Jiwoo was known as the martial emperor of Great Zhou. He was one of the founders of the Great Zhou Empire and the most famous emperor in the history of the six dynasties. His strength was considered outstanding among their group of Great Destruction ancestors. However, such a powerful Qi practitioner, who was famous in history, only lasted for a few breaths in front of Li Yueming before he was injured and retreated. Such an illogical and powerful combat strength had even exceeded the understanding of their brains for a moment. It was to the extent that many ancestors only reacted at this moment. They looked at each other at the same time and saw the disbelief in each other's eyes. Jiwoo wiped off the blood, stood up, and prepared to fight Li Yueming again. However, right at this moment, the founding father of the Great Zhou dynasty, Emperor Wen of Great Zhou, Ji Fengjiu, stood out and waved his sleeve to stop Jiwoo, who was about to fight with his life. He said, you're not his opponent. Don't give up your life for nothing. Jiwu was stunned, but he still insisted, Ancestor, but... As one of the most powerful prodigies, Jiwu had never met anyone of his age who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Now, there was no reason for him to be humiliated by a junior when he was old. Therefore, his meaning was very simple. Even if he had to risk his life, he had to maintain his pride as the imperial emperor, even if he knew that he might not be a match for Li Yueming. Ji Fengjiu ignored his anxiety. A pair of slightly turbid eyes that still showed deep wisdom stared at Li Yueming and sized him up a few times. Ji Fengjiu said with a solemn expression, if my senses are correct, he might not be a pure key refiner. As soon as he said this, instantly, everyone's eyes widened. Not a pure key refiner? If it was an ordinary person, they would definitely find it unbelievable. After all, other than the omnipotent ability of chi refiners, what other powerful abilities were there in this world? However, the people present were all extraordinary. Basically, each of them was an ancestor of their respective countries. Therefore, they naturally knew more about the secrets of this world. If Li Yueming was really a chi refiner, then there was only one possibility. He was from the same lineage as the ancient Great Jian dynasty. He was called a cultivator. But wasn't the secret of the ancient Great Gan wiped away by him personally? Why would such a strange creature still exist in the world? The group of people's expressions were uncertain, and their gazes towards Li Yueming were filled with deep fear. Of course, while they were observing Li Yueming was also observing them without stopping. From the expressions of Ji Fengjiu and the others, it could be seen that this group of old monsters knew much more than the current group of people. However, this was normal, because a lot of information might have been erased by their hands. Their minds naturally stored a huge amount of information that far exceeded what ordinary people knew. On the battlefield that was originally incomparably desolate. At this moment, due to Li Yueming's sudden burst of combat strength, it was a little quiet for a moment. In the end, Ji Fengjiu was the first to break the silence. With a serious expression, she asked, "This old man had already felt that it was strange. The aura that erupted from your body did not seem to be something that a pure chi refiner could possess." At this point, Ji Fengjiu narrowed his eyes and hit the nail on the head. "Junior, did you obtain the inheritance of the ancient Deduction?" Chapter 663, A Chaotic Battle, A Narrow Escape. 3. Li Yueming could reveal the other secrets. However, the secrets of the Great Jian dynasty and the Book of Changes were obviously more deeply involved. Li Yueming had yet to completely unravel them. Therefore, he would definitely not reveal any unnecessary information on this. Ji Fengjiu stared at his eyes. After realizing that she could not force him to tell her the answer with her aura, she lowered her eyes and sighed. "In that case, you are his mortal enemy. All the people and things related to you will be erased from this land, don't blame us for being ruthless." The others also reacted. It was different from the cold onlookers from before. Now, their eyes were filled with killing intent when they looked at Li Yueming. Hearing this, Li Yueming was so angry that he laughed and said sarcastically, "Bullshit, you want to erase everything related to me? I'm standing right here. You guys can line up and fight me alone or in a group. Bring it on." Although he was smiling, Li Yueming's expression was very cold. The killing intent in his words was like a bone-scraping knife. It was so sharp that it made people feel cold all over. Ji Fengjiu was the first to make a move. He was dressed in a wide white robe. With a swing of his arm, a huge spiritual chi hurricane appeared. The ground that was originally destroyed by Li Yueming shook even more violently. The spirit chi hurricane destroyed everything. Ji Fengjiu gently grabbed with his left hand. With a rumble, 100-meter-long boulder flew out of the earth's crust. This boulder also contained a very terrifying spirit chi. Ji Fengjiu gently pressed his arm and smashed it toward Li Yueming. The other ancestors did not stand by and watch anymore. They all used extremely destructive power. It was obvious that they had given up on the one-on-one battle they had initially expected and had decided to lose face and attack Li Yueming. Li Yueming wasn't too surprised. Rather than counting on this group of old men who were half a step into the coffin to talk about martial arts, it was better to hope that the sun would rise from the west. The so-called fair battle. It was when one side was too strong and the other was too weak. This was why some rules needed to be set to add some fun to the fight. However, Li Yueming was not weak. Therefore, this rule was not valid from the beginning. Therefore, Li Yueming was already prepared to take on the attacks of the 12 ancestors alone. Now that this scene had appeared, it was just as he had expected. Li Yueming didn't waste any time. He silently activated his perfect genetic body and used the fastest speed to evolve his body into the most suitable state for battle. At the same time, he also used all the cultivation techniques he had bought from Wang Linlin. Just as Ji Fenjihu said. This battle was not only related to himself, but also his elder sister, Li Ruyu, and second sister, Li Ruxing, and the lives of millions of Star Moon troops. According to the usual practice of the 6 nations. As long as he was defeated and died today. It was estimated that it would not be long before the entire northern glacier town was brutally wiped out by them in the long river of history. The results of thousands of people's painstaking efforts would also be destroyed overnight. This was something Li Yueming couldn't accept. Compared to his own death, he was even more unhappy that his results were destroyed. Therefore, he could only win today's battle. Li Yueming, who was covered in scales and had already transformed into a humanoid monster, did not even use spiritual energy when he saw the huge rock that Ji Fenjihu smashed over. He only used his powerful physical body to punch out, and the huge rock was shattered into pieces inch by inch. Even the huge spiritual energy contained in the huge rock was forcefully withstood by Li Yueming. Before Li Yueming could even catch his breath, the attacks of the other ancestors also flew over. Li Yueming dodged 3 or 4 of the attacks at an incredible speed, while he blocked the other 2 with his spiritual energy. After withstanding this round of attacks, he appeared in front of the injured Jiwu again like a flash of light. He was prepared to use Jiwu as a breakthrough point in this war. After all, although the 2 of them had only fought for a short while, Li Yueming's attack power was not a joke. Caught off guard, Jiwu was hit in the chest and was severely injured. Because of his injury, Jiwu's attack was slower than usual, which gave Li Yueming an opportunity to get close to him. He dodged the attacks from the others behind him. Li Yueming looked at Jiwu, who was in a panic, and said with a cold smile, "Transform, or you won't have the chance. Let me see what kind of monsters you are." Then, he turned his palm into a blade and slashed at Jiwu's head. Although Li Yueming's hand wasn't a real knife, it was sharper than any weapon in the world. If he was hit by this attack, Jiwu would lose a layer of skin even if he didn't die. Seeing that he was in a life and death situation, Jiwu finally gave up all unnecessary thoughts. A huge black shadow also appeared behind him. Logically speaking, Li Yueming should be used to this scene. However, this time, it was unknown whether it was because they were close to each other or because Jiwu was stronger than Ji Tian. Li Yueming felt as if the black shadow in front of him was real. He could even feel a cold gaze sweeping down from the black shadow, staring at him. Jiwu's 2 extra arms blocked the attack. Fortunately, Li Yueming was prepared. After realizing that this attack did not achieve the expected effect, he immediately dodged the attacks that followed behind. But even so, there were still a few bloody wounds on his body. Fiu novo. Fortunately, the recovery ability of a perfect genetic body was strong enough. Otherwise, these small wounds would be enough to make Li Yueming unable to take it. It was not easy for him to escape from the core of the battlefield. Li Yueming turned around and saw that Jiwu had turned into a humanoid figure. At this moment, Jiwu had a very strange head. A ferocious bone horn grew out of his head, and 2 more arms grew out of the original position of his arms. Behind the 4 arms, there was a transparent black wing. Li Yueming was now a humanoid monster. Then, Jiwu would no longer have the shape of a human. He was a deformed monster. Even his aura had become completely different from before. Even though he was already prepared for this, Li Yueming couldn't help but spit. If these old guys didn't master this strange secret technique, he would still have the confidence to say that it was still unknown who would win. Chapter 664, I'm still here, but I didn't retreat. That's enough. 1. How big was the fluctuation when existences above Nirvana fought? There were no direct attacks, but the aftermath of the battle was only the spiritual energy that spewed out. The jungle under everyone's feet seemed to have experienced an earthquake of more than 10 magnitude. The powerful destructive force from the battle destroyed the trees in the forest inch by inch. Even the soil dozens of meters underground was overturned by the huge air waves. Even so, it did not affect the dozen people fighting in the sky. The battle between the two sides became more and more intense, and at the same time, the aftershocks caused by the battle became more and more exaggerated. In the end, the entire forest's surface was dug down by them by dozens of meters. Even though the battlefield was already barren for thousands of miles, both sides still had no intention of stopping. At the beginning, under the siege of the 12 ancestors, Li Yueming was still able to find a chance to counterattack at the critical moment. However, as the battle became more and more intense, more and more wounds began to appear on Li Yueming's body. If it wasn't because his physical fitness was too strong, perhaps his life would have been in danger under the siege. After dodging a new round of attacks, he finally stopped to take a few breaths. Li Yueming looked at the old monsters not far away with a slightly angry gaze. At this moment, besides Jiwu, the other few old monsters were forced to use their trump cards. A black figure appeared behind them. Under the protection of the black figure, their physical fitness suddenly increased rapidly in a short period of time. Although they were still unable to compete with Li Yueming's powerful physique, it also made up for the biggest flaw of their weak bodies. This kind of unreasonable secret technique made Li Yueming not know where to start. The reason why he was so much stronger than the other Qi practitioners was not because of the Qi practitioner's own strength, but because of his strong physique and the treasures of the human body that could turn the rotten into the magical. But now, the strange secret technique allowed each of these old fellows to avoid death. This directly caused Li Yueming to have no way to end the battle quickly. He could only struggle to hold on under the siege. Just as Li Yueming stopped to look for a fighter jet. Not far away, Jiwu and Ji Fenjiao launched their attacks again. Li Yueming didn't dare to tangle with him for too long. He wanted to dodge. But almost at the same time, several other figures blocked the few directions that Li Yueming could escape from and launched a joint attack to stop him in place. Li Yueming gritted his teeth in anger, but he had no other choice. He could only resist the two attacks with relatively weak damage and forcefully break free from their encirclement. He felt a piercing pain in his back, as well as 2 bloody wounds. Li Yueming knew that he couldn't continue like this, so he finally decided to go all out. He gritted his teeth and endured a few attacks, diving to Jiwu and roaring, "Die!" As he spoke, a dazzling golden light burst out from Li Yueming's body. At this moment, there was still sunlight in the sky. However, in front of Li Yueming, even the sun in the sky seemed to have dimmed. The entire world was dyed gold. No one expected Li Yueming to be able to unleash such power. Therefore, the moment the golden light bloomed, the surrounding ancestors subconsciously chose to shift their gazes. However, it was in this short second. Li Yueming waved his long golden sword and slashed down. A beam of golden light that was dozens of meters long cut through the sky and cut Jiwu, who was standing not far away, in half. Jiwu's body was covered in black shadows. When he was struck by the golden blade light, these shadows seemed to have their own consciousness. They kept growing tentacles and tried to protect Jiwu behind them. However, Li Yueming had concentrated all of his essence, spirit, and spiritual power into this slash. It carried Li Yueming's conviction to kill. How could it be so easy to block? Therefore, under the powerful attack of the golden blade light, the black shadow on Jiwoo's body dissipated bit by bit. When the head and the body were separated, Jiwoo's eyes were still wide open with a look of disbelief. Looking at this scene that made one's hair stand on end. The remaining 11 forefathers of great destruction felt their bodies turn cold. They didn't expect Li Yueming to be so crazy. He didn't care if they would die together. They didn't expect Li Yueming to be so powerful. He was able to fight back and kill Jiwoo, who had activated God's descent. The remaining ancestors could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Fortunately, that was all. A hysterical counterattack could only succeed once. In that instant, the damage they had dealt to Li Yueming was already fatal. Next, as long as they fought steadily, Li Yueming would not be able to escape even if he had wings. After discovering that Jiwoo was killed, Ji Fengjiu was probably the most sorrowful one among all the ancestors. At this moment, the founder of the Great Zhou dynasty, who was also the oldest slumber, closed his eyes and let out a few drops of turbid tears. He sighed and said, "Why bother? Why bother?" He muttered a few words. Chapter 665, I'm still here, but I didn't retreat. That's enough. 2. Staring at Li Yueming, Ji Fengjiu said, "Young man, you are walking on the right path, but this world may not be so right. Jiwoo is my favorite grandson. If you kill him, I will tear you into pieces." Li Yueming was covered in blood, but his smile was still bright. He revealed a few white teeth and said, "Don't do to others what you don't want others to do to you. Since you want to erase everything around me, then be prepared to be killed by me." Just now, when he was trying to get close to Jiwoo, he had suffered 5 or 6 attacks on the way and was seriously injured. Of course, as long as his body wasn't completely dried up, and he wasn't hit by a fatal attack that he couldn't recover from, no matter how serious the other injuries were, it wouldn't be a problem for Li Yueming, who had a perfect genetic body. However, the problem was that it would take time for his injuries to heal. The perfect geno body was heaven-defying, but it wasn't heaven-defying enough to instantly heal all injuries. And now, the battlefield was changing rapidly. There was no time for Li Yueming to recover. "Stop talking nonsense. Hurry up and kill him before anything unexpected happens." After such a long period of battle, the ancestors clearly knew that Li Yueming's physical strength was very heaven-defying. They had to take advantage of his illness to kill him. They could not give him a moment to breathe. The group of people nodded. Riol.C. Without any hesitation, he launched another round of attacks while Li Yueming's injuries had yet to recover and he was unable to move freely. And this time, the first to attack was also Ji Fengjiu. A pair of wings also grew out of Ji Fengjiu's back. Compared to the others, the black shadow behind him was even clearer. From afar, it looked like it was real, and some details could even be seen. Jiwoo's strength could only be considered to be above average among this group of ancestors. Then Ji Fengjiu was undoubtedly one of the strongest people. Now, Ji Fengjiu had activated the God's descent state in a fit of rage, and the state of his entire body had been raised to the peak of his youth. Whether it was the momentum or the destructive power, it was completely different from before. Even the other old monsters who had activated God's descent were inferior to him. Hoo. A wave of spiritual energy fluctuation that made people speechless erupted from Ji Fengjiu's body. The violent energy made the expressions of the surrounding ancestors change. They said in fear and anger, "Ji Fengjiu, are you crazy? Do you want to die?" Ji Fengjiu, who had already returned to her peak condition when she was young, ignored their doubts and questions. He walked forward and appeared beside Li Yueming in an instant. Li Yueming subconsciously wanted to dodge, but because his injuries had not fully recovered, his reaction was a step slower. He was only a beat slower. With a step from Ji Fengjiu, Li Yueming flew out like a cannonball and directly sank hundreds of meters underground. After finally catching his breath, Li Yueming dragged his heavily injured body and fled thousands of miles away without any hesitation. In the next second, an extremely hot beam of light appeared at the place where the former had stopped. The surrounding muddy ground was heated by the terrifying heat of the beam, turning into red lava. Ji Fengjiahu's face was still expressionless even though his attack had missed. At this moment, he had completely shed his previous aging state and turned into a handsome young man. His pitch-black eyes stared at Li Yueming, who was coughing blood, and he said unhurriedly, "We were once young and high-spirited, thinking that we could change everything in this world with just our hands. How could you not look like us in the past? However, there is an end to human strength. It will never be able to compete with the gods who control everything. Right now, we have no other thoughts. We just want to continue living. For this, we have already paid too much. Now that you have ended our dreams, don't blame us for ending yours. This is very fair, right?" As he spoke, he came in front of Li Yueming and raised his right hand. Li Yueming wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Ji Fengjiahu had lived the longest and was also the most senile. Previously, he was only slightly stronger than Ji Wu. But now, after he activated God's descent and his body returned to its peak condition, he was able to feel the pain in his chest. Li Yueming was shocked to find that Ji Fengjiahu was much stronger than he had imagined. The other ancestors who had activated the God's descent state and Ji Fengjiahu who had activated the God's descent state were almost completely different. Li Yueming's bones were almost shattered by Ji Fengjiahu's kick just now because he could not dodge in time. His internal organs were also violently displaced. In such a short period of time, a perfect Geno body wouldn't be able to heal much of his injuries. If you can break through to the peak of Nirvana realm, or if you can open a layer of human treasure, then you can. Perhaps everything would be rewritten. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. He was already on the verge of dying. Chapter 666, I'm still here, but I didn't retreat. That's enough. 3. Ji Fengjiahu nodded and said coldly, "In that case, die." As he spoke, he grabbed down with one hand. If this attack was real, Li Yueming would definitely be turned into ashes. But at this moment, Li Yueming, who was originally gloomy, suddenly stood up. He grabbed Ji Fengjiahu's arm with one hand and tore it with his other hand. Rib! The sound of cloth shattering rang out. At this critical moment, Li Yueming actually tore off one of Ji Fengjiahu's arms. At the same time, a holy light erupted from his body, forcefully blocking the attack of the black phantom behind Ji Fengjiahu. This sudden scene stunned everyone. Li Yueming should have been at the end of his rope just now, so why did he suddenly have such a huge amount of power? Under the pain, Ji Fengjiahu's expression was very bad. He suddenly took a few steps back and stared at Li Yueming for a while before saying, "This is power of faith." Li Yueming casually threw away the arm that was still dripping blood. He ignored Ji Fengjiahu's shock and answered, "There are too many joys and sorrows in this world. How much can a pair of hands control?" He looked at Ji Fengjiahu and said word by word, "Maybe I can't control anything, maybe I can't change anything, but I'm still on the road, but I haven't retreated." Ji Fengjiahu was stunned. After a long while, he laughed involuntarily and said, "Perhaps you're right, but it doesn't matter, there are only a few who have the courage. Look behind you, there's no one else but yourself." Behind him, the remaining 10 ancestors had already surrounded him again. Li Yueming had surprised them many times. He had killed Ji Wu with his strong physique and injured Ji Fengjiahu with his power of faith. However, small tricks could only fight for a moment. In the face of absolute strength, everything seemed to pale. Of course, no matter what, Li Yueming's strength was still recognized by them. It had to be known that in the long river of history, they were the strongest people who stood at the end of the long river. But now, Li Yueming was able to achieve such a result under their joint siege. If word got out, it would probably set off a huge wave. Unfortunately, if nothing unexpected happened, everything would be buried today. Looking at the ancestors who still had no casualties, Li Yueming's expression was a little ugly. Up until now, Li Yueming had basically used all the trump cards he could. However, this group of old things were like cockroaches. They could not be killed no matter how hard they fought. Was this the fantasy world after the world level rose? Even if they were already many times stronger than other reincarnators, there were still enemies who could stand tenaciously in front of them and spit fiercely in their faces. The first two worlds were not so ridiculous. Just as Li Yueming was in a dilemma, several auras suddenly came from several directions in the 100,000 mountains behind him. This group of people present were all elites among elites. Therefore, the moment he sensed the aura, he turned around. A snow-white figure slowly walked over from the depths of the 100,000 mountains. Behind him were two spiritual beasts following closely. The snow-white little fox with a lazy expression chewed on the spiritual grass and said, "You killed my pet in my territory, did you ask me? How dare you?" Sensing this aura, including Ji Fenjiu, the expressions of all the ancestors changed. Someone said in disbelief, "Snow Fox King? No, you're not the Snow Fox King. Did that person really leave a backup plan?" A figure with disheveled hair and tattered clothes appeared at the end of his vision. He looked at Ji Fenjiu in the battlefield and said, "Who says no one has the courage to stand behind little friend Li? I, Shu Tian, am here today to help little friend Li." This crazy figure came very suddenly and very quickly. Li Yueming looked over and saw that the other party was actually the crazy teacher of the Great Zhou Cultivation College, Shu Tian. When she saw that it was him, Li Yueming's first reaction was shock. However, after regaining his senses, Li Yueming felt relieved. Back then, Shu Tian had been thought to be crazy by the Great Zhou Cultivation College. But now, not only did he not go crazy, he might even be more clear-headed than anyone else. He was just pretending to be crazy to protect himself. The figures that appeared one after another disrupted the rhythm of the battlefield. After Shu Tian appeared, another white-haired purple-robed old man rushed over. The purple-robed old man glanced at Li Yueming, then turned to look at Ji Fenjiu, who was not far away with half of his sleeve empty, and said, "Ji Fenjiu, you have a grandson, and I have a grandson too. If you dare to bully my grandson for your old age, I will risk my life to take your life." After saying that, the old man quickly flew in front of Li Yueming, scratched his head, and explained, "Grandson, I'm sorry. Your ancestor hasn't been feeling well recently and almost overslept." Li Yueming concealment. Who is your grandson? Chapter 667, Ultimate Evolution of a Perfect Genetic Body. 1. At this moment, the person standing in front of Li Yueming was the founder of the Li family, Li Wujiang. More than 1,000 years ago, Li Zhang was already a heavenly tribulation qi refiner. Now that more than 1,000 years had passed, Li Wujiang could still appear in front of the world alive and kicking. There was obviously only one possibility, and that was that Li Wujiang had also touched the nirvana realm above the heavenly tribulation. In addition, Shu Tian, who had chosen to pretend to be crazy after waking up, and the two spiritual beasts following behind the little fox. Currently, there were 5 nirvana realm experts standing behind Li Yueming. This number was beyond Li Yueming's expectations, but it was reasonable after thinking about it carefully. The 100,000 mountains was so vast that it was impossible for there to be no nirvana realm beast emperors among them. However, Li Yueming was a little surprised that they followed behind the little fox. The outside world naturally didn't need to be said. Although old monsters like Ji Fenjiu were still paying attention to the changes in the outside world, the 6 empires were also following the will of the old monsters to consciously prevent the emergence of powerful qi refiners. However, even if gods would occasionally take a nap, whether it was the old monsters or the dynasties, they still could not see the world. Over time, there would always be some smart people who would notice the truth and hide it. In fact, Li Yueming had been trying to find it for a long time. It was just that he had not been able to find any traces. Looking at the figures that suddenly appeared in front of them, the expressions of the ancestors of the various countries could not help but change. Of course, in terms of combat strength, they still had the absolute advantage. After all, there was only one Li Yueming. It was impossible for the others to have the terrifying combat power of 1 against 10 like Li Yueming. Especially since Li Wujiang and Shu Tian were only at the initial stage of Nirvana realm. It could not change the balance of the battle at all. The reason why his expression was not good was because he did not like accidents that were beyond his control. Point 0. With a few more reinforcements, Ji Fengjiu and the others still had the absolute advantage on the battlefield. Li Wujiang and Shu Tian were only in the early stage of Nirvana realm. Under normal circumstances, they could barely deal with a peak Nirvana realm ancestor. Now, they were gritting their teeth and fighting one ancestor each. It was already very difficult. Fortunately, the two spiritual beasts from the 100,000 mountains behind the little fox were quite powerful. One of the spirit wolves was a super spirit beast that had broken through to the peak of the Nirvana realm. Its sharp teeth and claws could even threaten Ji Fengjiu to a certain extent. It was also the most ferocious and brutal. It was fine if he didn't make a move, but the moment he made a move, he directly rushed towards Ji Fengjiu, who was the strongest person present. The two sides exchanged a few blows in midair, but the spirit wolf actually did not show any obvious signs of defeat. One had to know that although Ji Fengjiu's arm was torn off by Li Yueming, with the help of God's descent, Ji Fengjiu's combat strength did not decline too much. It could be said that he was still at his peak. Even Li Yueming had to treat Ji Fengjiu with caution in this state. Now, he was stopped by this spiritual beast in the 100,000 mountains. It was enough to show how terrifying his strength was. The other giant snow bear was not weak either. With its innately powerful body and almost innate killing instinct, it was enough to fight against two elders at the peak of the Nirvana realm. After the two humans and two beasts entered the battlefield, Li Yueming's awkward situation was greatly alleviated. Li Yueming also took this opportunity to recover from his injuries and quickly pull up his combat strength as soon as possible. However, Li Yueming's presence was too conspicuous. The only variable in this battle was him. As for the rest, be it the spirit wolf or the giant bear, they did not have the overwhelming strength of Li Yueming. Therefore, the remaining ancestors obviously wouldn't give Li Yueming a chance to recover. To be on the safe side, they surrounded the spirit wolf and released Ji Fengjiu, who was the most powerful among them. Together with the other two Great Qin's Great Destruction Peak Stage ancestors and Great Ming Peak Stage ancestor, they rushed over to kill Li Yueming. Looking at Ji Fengjiu and Great Qin's old ancestor getting closer and closer, Li Yueming took a deep breath. Even though he had not fully recovered from his injuries, he still had the strength to fight. Just as he was about to rush out to see if he could find any fighter aircraft, a snow-white figure suddenly appeared in front of Li Yueming. The little fox glanced at Li Yueming and did not say anything. She turned her head to look at Ji Fengjiu and the others and said, "Don't you think too little of me?" Looking at the little fox standing in front of Li Yu, Ji Fengjiu and Great Qin's ancestor paused. Logically speaking, at such a critical juncture, there was no reason for the ancestors to be distracted and hesitate because of a single sentence. However, they had really stopped now. There was a hint of fear in his eyes as he looked at the little fox. However, after a moment of silence, Ji Fengjiu still stood up and replied coldly, "There hasn't been any news about that existence for tens of thousands of years. The Snow Fox King should have been powerless to turn the tide long ago, right?" Chapter 668, Ultimate Evolution of a Perfect Genetic Body. 2. If you insist on protecting him, we can only fight each other. Everyone looked at the little fox, waiting for her reply. The little fox snorted coldly when she heard that. She ignored Ji Fengjiu and the others in the air and turned to look at Li Yueming. "Brat, Tell this king honestly, how much time do you need this king to help you by? Li Yueming was stunned and subconsciously replied, it won't take long. Half an incense's time should be enough. The little fox was obviously stunned when she heard this. After a moment, she replied with a strange expression, half an incense worth of time, right? Kid, your timing is very accurate. Looks like you're really prepared to make this king risk his life for you. Li Yueming smiled bitterly. In just a moment, the little fox had already rushed up. Ji Fenjiu and the others were stopped by the little fox. The other patriarchs were still in the middle of the battle, unable to escape. Li Yueming quickly sat down and began to use his perfect Geno body to heal his injuries. Half an incense's time passed. This was not only the time limit estimated by Little Fox, but also the time limit estimated by Li Yueming. At this moment, Li Wujiang and Xu Tianzheng were fighting each other with a Nirvana realm ancestor. Although they could still deal with it at the moment, the two of them would definitely not be a match for the two ancestors as time went on. It wasn't that they were too weak, but that the two ancestors were too powerful. Not only had the other party's ancestor stepped into the Nirvana realm thousands of years earlier than them, but he had also activated the secret technique God's Descent to raise his strength to the peak. He was not someone that ordinary Qi practitioners could compete with. On the other side, the spirit wolf and the giant bear were very powerful. They were probably the ancestors of the 100,000 mountains. But now, they were facing a large number of enemies. In front of the spirit wolf, there were 3 elders at the peak of the Nirvana realm. In front of the giant bear, there was 1 less, but there were still 2. Although they could still resist, they were also relying on their thick skin to forcefully stall for time. Little Fox, who was under the most pressure, was in an even more dangerous situation. If Li Yueming couldn't recover to his peak state in this half an incense's time, then the result of this battle wouldn't change much. The only difference was whether one person died or a group died. But since they knew that the situation was dangerous, they still came without hesitation. Wasn't it also a form of trust towards him? Li Yueming didn't want anyone to die because of him. He also did not wish to disappoint the trust that the people of Northern Glacier Town and the Northwest had in him. Therefore, not only did he have to win this battle, he had to win it beautifully. Restrain the excess emotions, feel yourself, because of injury, become somewhat weak, body, Li Yueming, make up your mind, and make up your mind. When he had obtained the perfect genetic body talent in the previous world, the system had given him an item called Perfect Gene Supporter. Name, Perfect Gene Serum Supporter. Introduction: there was once an incomparably powerful planet that developed a super evolutionary drug. After injecting the super evolutionary drug, the creature can evolve into countless perfect forms according to its own will and the changes in the external environment. However, in the end, this drug evolved into a terrifying disaster due to its infinite evolution. The entire universe was swept by the disaster, and the planet that developed the drug also suffered a devastating blow. When you discover that your brain is unable to control your body to stop evolving, please inject this potion. Perhaps it can save your life. When he first obtained this potion, Li Yueming never thought that he would need it one day. After all, Li Yueming felt that he had the infinite deduction talent at that time. His infinite deduction ability could suppress the side effects of evolution to a certain extent. But now, Li Yueming had to be glad that he still had this thing to cover for him. He closed his eyes and began to fully control the 2 top-tier golden talents, infinite deduction and perfect genetic body. He was ready to undergo a complete evolution of his current body form. Although the previous evolution could be said to be perfect, it was still only the evolution of the human form. The starting point of evolution was the enhancement of the concept of human. However, this wasn't the limit of a perfect genetic body. It wasn't even half of its potential. The evolution that started with the concept of humans and the evolution that started with the concept of life forms were 2 completely different concepts. The result of developing these 2 different concepts would be an absolute difference in the increase in combat strength. The reason why Li Yueming hadn't explored this area was that he hadn't been forced into a corner and needed to use this ultimate method. It was also because Li Yueming didn't want to take unnecessary risks. After all, evolving from a biological perspective meant that one had to first overthrow some of their genes as humans. There were too many risks and uncertainties in this process. Even the infinite deduction talent could not guarantee that there would be no accidents during the evolution process. If anything went wrong, the consequences would be terrifying. Chapter 669, Ultimate Evolution of a Perfect Genetic Body. 3. If it wasn't for the fact that he was in desperate need of strength now. Under normal circumstances, Li Yueming would not open Pandora's box. He closed his eyes and took 1 breath, 2 breaths. Li Yueming's sweat became more and more. If one looked closely, one would find that his bones and muscles were squirming violently at this moment. The perfect genetic body was giving his body an even stronger physique and an even more terrifying recovery speed. However, this process looked a little scary. For others, a perfect genetic body might be a Pandora's box that was completely uncontrollable. However, for Li Yueming, the infinite deduction talent reduced the uncontrollable factors in the evolution process by a lot. Under normal circumstances, as long as one was willing to spend time to deduce it over and over again, there should not be too many problems. The only pity was that what Li Yueming lacked the most was time. As time passed, the battlefield not far away became more and more unstable. The giant bear and the spirit wolf had several hideous and terrifying wounds on their bodies. The little fox was also beaten back step by step, and dark red blood flowed out of its mouth. Li Wujiang and Shu Tian were even more miserable. One of them lost a leg, and the other lost an arm. After suffering such heavy injuries, their combat strength had already fallen to an extent that they could not continue. Finally, the time for half an incense stick to burn was up. However, Li Yueming was still sitting cross-legged on the ground, showing no intention of getting up. Several ancestors present had been paying attention to Li Yueming's movements. When they saw this, they could not help but laugh out loud. The injuries on his body might not be able to heal even if he recuperates for 10 days to half a month. What can half an incense stick of time do? You're actually stupid enough to listen to this junior's one-sided words. Failure is the inevitable outcome for you. The others also heaved a sigh of relief. This was the outcome of going against his will. Many years ago, we knew that someone had broken through to nirvana, but they were suffering from a deep sleep, so we couldn't find any traces of you. Now that you've delivered yourselves to our doorstep, we can save the effort needed to clean up the world. With that, Ji Fenjiu, who was at the forefront of the battlefield, suddenly slapped the little fox away. The little fox, who was already heavily injured and at the end of her rope, fell rapidly like a kite with a broken string. She fell to the ground and struggled for a long time, but she could not get up again. At the same time, the other 3 ancestors who were fighting with the little fox finally got out of the chaotic battle. Without any nonsense, he flew straight towards Li Yueming. Looking up at this scene, the little fox wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and smiled helplessly. This young lady is betting her life on you. You promised me half an incense stick worth of time, so don't disappoint me. No one responded. Even the other patriarchs who had yet to come out slowed down the frequency of their attacks at the same time. They divided their attention to look at the scene where Li Yueming was killed not far away. In the beginning, more than 10 ancestors came together to kill Li Yueming. They were all very disdainful. After all, at that time, they thought that there was no one in this world that they needed to work together to encircle and annihilate. However, as the battle continued, the group of ancestors realized that they had made a huge mistake. Li Yueming's combat strength was so strong that it shocked them. Not only did he withstand the attacks of more than 10 people, but he also successfully killed Ji Wu. Not only did he kill Ji Wu, he even tore off one of Ji Fenjiu's arms. Although the sudden appearance of a few reinforcements was still unable to change the direction of the battle, Li Yueming's existence was still like a thorn in their throat, making them uneasy. Now that everything was about to be settled, even with their temperament, they could not help but feel relieved. The patriarchs who had left the battlefield were extremely fast. Among them, the strongest and fastest one was the founder of the Darming dynasty. Like Ji Fengjiu, he was also the ancestor who had fallen asleep at the beginning. Everyone watched as he grabbed Li Yueming's head with one hand. As long as we crush this demon-like young man's head, this world should be able to return to the right track that has lasted for nearly 10,000 years. At this moment, all the ancestors thought so. The Darming dynasty's ancestor didn't let them down, and he clenched his 5 fingers. And so, the most ridiculous scene appeared. Li Yueming's head did not explode as expected. Instead, dozens of protruding bone spurs grew out. These bone spikes were sharp and hard. Not only did the Darming dynasty's ancestor not crush Li Yueming's head, but his palm was pierced by a sharp and hard bone spike. Li Yueming, who was still in deep sleep, seemed to have sensed the abnormality of the outside world. He suddenly opened his eyes and swept a cold glance at everyone. He got up and stretched his body. "All of you, go to hell!" As soon as he finished speaking, the Darming dynasty's ancestor, who was closest to him, widened his eyes. Under the pain, Great Ming ancestor subconsciously retracted his pierced palm. However, before he could do anything else, he lowered his head and realized that his wound had turned black. Countless purple-black liquids were crazily moving up his palm like maggots in his bones, rapidly corroding his body. The Darming dynasty's ancestor had lived for more than 10,000 years, but this was the first time he had seen such a ridiculous thing, and he couldn't help widening his eyes in shock as he said, "Poisonous? How is that possible?" Li Yueming responded with a bone knife. There was only a puff sound. The sharp bone blade carried a terrifying brute force and cut open half of the Great Ming ancestor's body. In the end, his head was chopped off. Until the moment of his death, Great Ming ancestor still did not know what had happened. Why did Jianjin, who was still a perfectly fine person, suddenly become a monster that even he could not understand? Chapter 670, End of the Curtain, Head to the 100,000 Mountains. 1. After dealing with Great Ming ancestor, Li Yueming looked at Ji Fengjiu, who was not far away, and licked her lips. "It's your turn, old man." Hearing his voice, the surrounding ancestors finally came back to their senses. After discovering that the Great Ming ancestor had died in an instant, all the ancestors looked at Li Yueming with disbelief. Let's not talk about how Li Yueming recovered from his physical injuries in less than half an incense stick's time. Just the sudden riot just now, Li Yueming only used one attack to forcefully split the Great Ming ancestor into 2 halves. It stimulated the senses of the other ancestors around him. Especially the few ancestors who were closest to Li Yueming, they were stunned by Li Yueming's ferocious aura for a moment. They even had the urge to escape. They could not be blamed for not having a firm mind. It was indeed because Li Yueming's aura was too terrifying. The pressure he gave them was as if they were not in the same life dimension. It was a higher level of life overlooking a lower level of life. It was just a face-to-face encounter. The group of ancestors were frightened by Li Yueming's current state. As the second target that Li Yueming had targeted, this feeling was even stronger for Ji Fengjiu. If Li Yueming gave him the feeling of a ferocious beast before, then the feeling he gave him now was like an unknown monster at the top of the food chain. Whether it was his strength or aura, they were no longer the same as before. It was hard to imagine what kind of monster this young man in front of him was to make him feel a sense of fear despite being in the state of God's arrival. Forcefully calming down, Ji Fengjiu said coldly, "Even if we return with a halberd today, you can only be considered a grasshopper after autumn. You won't be able to survive for a few days." Clearly, even Ji Fengjiu was no longer as confident as before. After the initial feeling of everything is under control dissipated, what followed was an invisible fear of falling into a bottomless abyss with one step. Even though Ji Fengjiu had already prepared for death thousands of years ago, when he really reached this step, he still couldn't help but feel a little flustered. However, the battle had already progressed to this stage. It was already a battle to the death. Li Yueming wouldn't give them any chance. Li Yueming, who had evolved from a living creature to a non-human monster, now had endless power in his body. All the functions of his body, whether it was speed, strength, or the recovery speed that best reflected the characteristics of a monster, had reached a peak that even Li Yueming himself had never reached before. It could be said that the current Li Yueming was one of the top existences in this world. He took a few deep breaths and felt the vigorous power in his body. Li Yueming did not waste any more time. He took a step forward and flew through the battlefield in a flash. He got rid of all the other ancestors who tried to stop him and approached Ji Fengjiu. Sensing the danger approaching, Ji Fengjiu's reaction speed had to be said to be very fast. The moment he noticed Li Yueming appearing in front of him, he immediately retreated quickly, wanting to avoid Li Yueming's long-prepared attack. However, he still underestimated Li Yueming's reaction speed. He only retreated a few dozen meters. Li Yueming had already quickly approached like a ghost. He did not make any fancy movements. He only raised his right arm that had already turned into a bone knife and slashed at Ji Fengjiu, who was not far away. This slash did not have much spiritual energy fluctuation. In the perception of the remaining ancestors, it was not even fast. If it was before, everyone would probably think that this was just an ordinary attack. But just a moment ago, everyone had witnessed Li Yueming use this blade to directly slash the Darming dynasty's soldier vertically, so they knew how astonishing the destructive power of this seemingly simple attack was. In Ji Fengjiu's perception, this saber move seemed very terrifying. His eyes widened as he watched the incomparably sharp bone blade grow larger and larger in front of him. Subconsciously, he wanted to mobilize his body to escape quickly. However, at this moment, he did not know if it was his own body that was too slow or Li Yueming's attack that was too fast. Even when the bone saber was almost close to his body, he could not take a step back. He barely raised his right hand and gathered all the spiritual energy in his body to form an invisible wall of spiritual energy, trying to block the attack of the bone blade. Kaka! The moment the bone blade fell, the sound of the spiritual energy wall shattering could be heard. All the ancestors who witnessed this scene could not help but gape. In the next second, cracks appeared on the spiritual energy wall that was almost condensed from all the spiritual energy in Ji Fengjiu's body. As the crack continued to expand, a wave of spiritual energy that could be called a nuclear explosion exploded. Bang! Almost all the living beings within a radius of thousands of miles were killed by this terrifying shockwave. Millions of tons of soil were rolled up under their feet, and hundreds of thousands of towering ancient trees were shattered into pieces. Chapter 671, End of the Curtain, Head to the 100,000 Mountains. 2. Li Yueming's expression didn't change much. This slash was actually really blocked by the staggering Ji Fengjiu. From this, it could be seen how powerful Ji Fengjiu was. At the very least, he was more than a level stronger than the great Ming ancestor, who was also an ancestor. But for Li Yueming, that was all. The perfect genetic body had already transformed his body into a biological level war machine. Not only were all the organs and meridians dedicated to combat, but the only reason why the various physical features of the body existed was also for combat. This state had a terrifying effect on Li Yueming's combat strength. Even if he was facing an existence that had truly ascended and left this world, he should still have the strength to fight now. Naturally, it was not something that Ji Fengjiu, who had yet to break away from nirvana, could compare to. After shattering the spiritual energy shield, Ji Fengjiu flew back thousands of meters. However, before he could stop, Li Yueming caught up with him in the air and slashed him in half. Ji Fengjiu's blood splattered dozens of meters away, mixed with a lot of black and strange substances. After confirming that he had been killed in one blow, Li Yueming put away his bone saber and prepared to leave. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a creepy aura. He turned around and saw that the mysterious black figure behind Ji Fengjiu had not dissipated like the others. Instead, it was twisting and struggling, as if it wanted to truly come alive through time and space. Li Yueming could also feel the fierce, resentful, and angry eyes of the black figure. This made Li Yueming feel like he was facing a great enemy. Fortunately, the worst-case scenario did not occur. The black figure struggled for a few breaths before finally disappearing into the sky, as if it had never appeared. Li Yueming heaved a sigh of relief. He could not care less about what this thing was and looked at the remaining 8 ancestors again. This encirclement and suppression of Li Yueming. The 6 nations sent out a total of 12 old monsters above Nirvana. Now, the 4 strongest of them had been killed by Li Yueming on the spot. The remaining 8 people were scared out of their wits. Even if they were once the strongest masters of a certain era, leading the world for hundreds of years, possessing unparalleled strength and faith, they were now crushed by Li Yueming's freakish junior. One had to know that no matter if it was Ji Fengjiu or Great Ming ancestor, they were both super experts close to the soaring realm. Whether it was power or backup, they were the oldest existences among the sleepers. But now, they had all died in Li Yueming's hands. How could they continue fighting Li Yueming to the death? After realizing that Li Yueming had turned around to look at them, the remaining few ancestors did not want to continue fighting at the first moment. Instead, they subconsciously prepared to flee. This scene looked rather comical. But in the eyes of Shu Tian and Li Wujiang, they couldn't laugh at all. This was because they could not imagine that such a group of heroes who only existed in legends would one day flee for their lives like this. Li Yueming subconsciously prepared to chase after them and eliminate them. After all, although they were like stray dogs in front of him, they were still the strongest group of people outside. If they couldn't deal with everything, the consequences to the outside world could be very serious. However, before Li Yueming could make a move, the group of ancestors who had scattered and fled suddenly shouted. One by one, they fell from the sky and fell to the ground as if they had seen something terrifying. Li Yueming stood in the sky and watched this scene silently. The old ancestor, who had fallen to the ground, had a ferocious expression on his face. His entire body was emitting black smoke as he began to roll back and forth on the ground while screaming. An ancestor let out an agonized scream, crying bitterly as he muttered, spare me, please spare me." However, their struggles seemed to be useless. As they rolled, their skin swelled up like balloons. In the end, under the shocked gazes of Little Fox, Shu Tian, and the others, these 8 unparalleled ancestors exploded like a bursting ball, and dirty black blood dripped onto the ground. This terrifying scene stunned everyone who witnessed it. Only Li Yueming was familiar with this scene. If he remembered correctly, it was a similar scene before Ji Tian's death. Freoval.cm. However, compared to Ji Tian, who suddenly exploded, the death of these ancestors seemed to be more tragic. It was good that he died just like that. It saved him the trouble of chasing after them for thousands of miles. Point 0. After making sure that everything was settled, all the people in the game sighed in relief. Li Yueming had spent a lot of effort to finally decipher the ultimate evolution state of the perfect genetic body and return to the appearance of a human. This kind of genetic modification consumed a lot of energy stored in the body. After a few rounds of torture, Li Yueming was already exhausted. Even so, everything was not over yet. Li Yueming looked at Shu Tian and Li Wujiang, who were not far away, and bowed before saying, "Senior Shu Tian, Senior Ancestor, thank you for your help." Hearing this, Shu Tian nodded slightly, accepting his gratitude. Chapter 672, End of the Curtain, Head to the 100,000 Mountains. 3. Li Yueming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Ignoring their old ancestor who took advantage of his seniority, he continued to look at the giant bear and spirit wolf behind the little fox and said, "Thank you for your help, seniors." The giant bear did not speak. The spirit wolf spoke in human language. We are all servants of the princess. If you want to thank her, thank the princess. After she sensed the aura here, she brought us here without stopping. Hearing this, the little fox turned her head slightly and said, "Humph, you're a human pet. Have your wings hardened now? How long has it been since you came to the snow mountain to find me?" Li Yueming touched his nose in embarrassment. In this world, only the little fox could call him a pet without any scruples. After all, he had relied on the little fox's power to establish Northern Ice River Town from the beginning. He did not expect the little fox's thigh to be so thick. Until today, it could be considered that she had hugged him from head to tail. She could feel his shame. The little fox rolled her eyes and said angrily, "It's fine if their relationship is weak, but the trouble is getting bigger and bigger. If this king hadn't arrived in time today, you would probably have been tortured by that guy." Towards the end, little fox felt that it was not entirely right to say this. Her pair of lively eyes sized up Li Yueming and added, "However, you are indeed a little heaven-defying. I wonder how you grew up." Li Yueming smiled bitterly. "My dear Lord Snow Fox, don't tease me. Let's find a place to rest. I have some questions for you." The little fox's background was definitely not simple. This was something that could be seen from the entrance of the god burial ground that the So clan's worshippers had left behind. Moreover, the spirit beasts in the 100,000 mountains were basically unable to speak. Until now, Li Yueming had only seen the little fox and the wolf king able to speak. Even the giant bear, who was at the peak of the Nirvana realm, seemed unable to speak. All kinds of signs were enough to prove that the little fox was special. If Li Yueming was not wrong, the little fox might have some inexplicable connection with the person in the god burial ground. The little fox glanced at him and snorted. "Now, this king has already bet all his assets on you. Even if you don't ask, this king will tell you everything." At this point, she paused. His pair of lively eyes glanced at Shu Tian and Li Wujiang who were behind Li Yueming and continued, "But forget about the two guys behind you. It's not a good thing for them to know too much because they're too weak." Li Yueming didn't say anything. Shu Tian and Li Wujiang felt their faces burn. If someone else had said that they were weak, the two of them would probably laugh coldly. After all, the weakest among them was at the initial stage of the Nirvana realm. It was already difficult to find a match in this world. But now, it was Little Fox who said this. She was a super big shot who had withstood the combined attacks of the Great Zhou ancestor, Great Ming ancestor, and the other two Great Qin ancestors. Even the two followers behind her were at the peak of the Nirvana realm. Therefore, let alone the little fox saying that they were weak. Even if he pointed at the two of them and scolded them, he would probably have to lower his head and accept it. Seeing the awkward atmosphere, the younger Shu Tian said in embarrassment, "That senior is right. Junior will go back and recuperate first. If you have any instructions, you can come and find me." With that, he slipped away without looking back. He had no choice but to stay here and be humiliated. The remaining Li Wujiang looked around and said, I came out in a hurry today and forgot that I still have clothes to confiscate at home. I'll go back first before it rains." He then said to Li Yueming, "Good grandson, this old man will wait for you to come back in the ancestral hall. Our Li family's grand ambition has just begun." Li Wujiang also slipped away. Li Yueming didn't stop him. Whether it was Li Wujiang or Shu Tian, they were both heavily injured in this battle. It was good to go back and recuperate now. FENVO. Moreover, it was indeed not appropriate for him to get too involved in the matter he wanted to discuss with the little fox. Seeing the two of them leave, Little Fox turned around and said, "Let's go back to the snow mountain with me." Li Yueming nodded without saying anything. Chapter 673, Sweep the Six Nations and Unify the World. 1. Not long after the three beasts and one person left the battlefield. The secret agents of Great Qin, and Northern Ice River Town all rushed to the battlefield outside the 100,000 mountains. When he had shattered Ji Fenjia's spirit Qi shield, the power that had exploded out was simply too great, and the shattered spirit Qi spread out over a large area. Great Qi, and Northern Ice River Town all felt that something was amiss. Only then did the higher UPS of the various countries send a large number of secret agents to investigate. However, when they arrived at the scene, both sides had already left. Therefore, the group of secret agents who had arrived late could only look at the mess on the ground with their mouths agape. What exactly happened here? Why was it that the soil in the depths of the earth had surged to the surface, and there was not a single intact tree within a radius of nearly 1,000 miles? Could it be that the Earth Dragon's reversal had erupted? For the weak scouts, the scene before them was really difficult to understand. As a result, the first thing they thought of was not the work of human strength, but the once-in-a-century turn of the Earth Dragon. In their opinion, only such a natural disaster could cause such a terrifying scene. However, the only thing that puzzled all the spies was, if it was really as they had guessed, and the Earth Dragon had turned over, why was there such a dense spiritual energy fluctuation here? The chaotic wisps of spiritual energy in the air were emitting a terrifying pressure, constantly telling them that what was happening here was not ordinary. The scouts investigated for a while but did not find any evidence that could directly prove what had happened here. Thus, he could only report truthfully. After the scouts left, the herbalists nearby who sensed the abnormality also rushed over one after another to investigate. As a result, everything that happened outside the mountain inevitably spread to the outside world. Everyone is confused. There were no records of Earth Dragons turning over. Then what was the reason for the barren land thousands of miles away from the 100,000 mountains? However, no matter how the outside world speculated, they would not be able to get any answers at this moment. In the end, as time passed, the impact related to this matter would gradually spread to the whole world 10 times, or even 100 times. Deep in the snow mountain, the bone-chilling wind whistled. The world was white and silent. Li Yueming and Little Fox came to the cave where she had always lived. In the previous battle, the Little Fox had also suffered considerable injuries. At this moment, he was lazily lying on the chair. Li Yueming sat down beside him. He didn't waste any time and asked a question that had been buried in his heart for a long time: what exactly is the so-called him? The Little Fox thought for a moment before saying, "Who knows what he is? This is beyond my knowledge." Hearing this, Li Yueming was stunned. He thought that Little Fox would be able to give him a reliable answer to this question. He didn't expect that she didn't even know herself. Sensing the strange emotion in his eyes, the Little Fox rolled her eyes and said unhappily, Hey, are you thinking too highly of this king? Although this king is indeed very awesome, I was not personally involved in that war after all. Besides, apart from them, who knows what them?" Li Yueming nodded. What Little Fox said made sense. However, since the Little Fox was not related to the concept of, then why was there a pattern similar to the Little Fox on the door to the God burial ground? Li Yueming told the Little Fox what he saw and heard when he entered the God burial ground under Su Xian's lead. At his current level, there was nothing in the world that was worthy of his curiosity. Moreover, the Little Fox was a beast king in the 100,000 mountains. It was impossible for her not to know about the God burial ground in the depths of the mountains. As expected, after hearing that Li Yueming had entered the God burial ground, the Little Fox's expression became a little strange. After a moment, he said, "No wonder you suddenly asked about this king's background after coming out of the 100,000 mountains. You really saw something in the God burial ground, right?" Li Yueming nodded. Seeing this, the originally lazy expression on the Little Fox's face suddenly disappeared. It revealed a rare serious expression and said, "Since you already know enough, there's no need for this king to say any more unnecessary nonsense. The picture you saw on the door of the God burial ground wasn't this king, but this king's mother. This king's mother was called the extreme cold snow fox from the distant outer realm. She was the servant of that person in the god burial ground. This king was born when my mother was about to die. After I was born, I inherited some of my mother's broken memory fragments. What this king is telling you now is also what is left behind in the memory fragments. Li Yueming glanced at the little fox. No wonder Qi Fan, a veteran reincarnator, had always been obsessed with little fox. It turned out that the little fox's mother was from the powerful extreme cold snow fox clan. Li Yueming had never come into contact with this race before, but he had heard its name on the forum. Therefore, he could react immediately now. Little Fox paused for a moment and waited for Li Yueming to recover before continuing. About 20,000 years ago, a universe-level true treasure appeared in the universe that could unravel the mysteries of time. Chapter 674, Sweep the Six Nations and Unify the World. 2. Under this premise, this king's mother followed the master of the god burial ground and the faction behind the master of the god burial ground to fight countless enemies. Mother and master are both very powerful. The moment they attacked, they attracted the enemy's attention. In order not to hurt the innocent, the mother and master left the battlefield and fought with the enemy. In the end, mother and master were unable to fight against four hands with two fists. They were chased by the enemy all the way to the depths of the starry sky and were defeated in hatred. When they were on the verge of death, they happened to pass by this planet. The terrifying aftershock of the battle almost wiped out all the life on the surface of this planet. You should know about this, right? Back then, the one that was exterminated was the ancient Great Gan. And now, the extremely cold snow mountain you are standing on is the place where my mother died. As for the endless volcano that is always boiling in the depths, it is the place where my master died. Hearing this, Li Yueming's heart trembled even more. No wonder he always felt that this world was full of strangeness. The level of the power system was always high and low. It was because it involved the ultimate masters who could fight in the universe. However, this could not explain all the doubts in Li Yueming's heart. Therefore, he thought about it and asked, if that's the case, then what about the war between the human sovereign Tiando clan and the insect race? Was the him that the six nations believed in the same as the one that destroyed this world? Li Yueming asked one question after another. The little fox rolled her eyes again and said, how do you know all these? This king was still in a deep slumber 10,000 to 20,000 years ago. The reason why I can tell you so much now is because I inherited my mother's memories. Otherwise, this king might not even know more than ordinary people. After hearing her reply, Li Yueming realized that he had lost his composure. However, there was nothing he could do about it. It was because he had too many doubts in his stomach that he would unconsciously ask questions as long as he found a channel. The information provided by Little Fox was very important to Li Yueming. Due to his limited strength, the information that Li Yueming could investigate was limited to this world. Similar to Little Fox's description of the birth of a universal treasure that triggered a shocking war, Li Yueming could not and had no reason to find any clues in this world. Now that all the information was combined, it was actually clearer. Because of the treasure, a universe-level war broke out. Both sides had sent out more than 2 universe-level supreme warriors to fight. One of them was defeated and fled. When he happened to pass by this world, the aftermath of the battle between the Supreme Being experts destroyed the Great Gan Lord dynasty, which was once prosperous in the ancient times. This was supported by the So clan's description of the disaster in the ancient Great Jian dynasty. The ancient Great Gan did not slowly decline in the river of time. Instead, it suddenly collapsed overnight, turning the entire world into ruins. The reason why the So clan was able to survive and continue the bloodline of the ancient Great Gan was because the supreme martial artist in the god burial ground had protected them before he died. It was also because of this friendship that the So clan would pay their respects to the supreme being of death in the god burial ground for generations. After perfecting all the relevant information, it seemed very simple to come to these conclusions. However, before Little Fox provided him with this information, Li Yueming would never have thought that this LV5 world would have so many implications. Seeing Li Yueming suddenly fall into silence, Little Fox could not help but comfort him. "All right, although I don't know the problem, I know someone who does. As long as I send you there, everything will come to light. Besides, as long as you move your feet, you can guess that he that the 6 dynasties believe in is definitely inextricably linked to the existence that killed my mother and the owner of the god's burial ground. You killed his believers in this world, and he will definitely come to find trouble with you. Your current strength is enough to be called invincible in the world, but when faced with such an unreasonable existence, you still have no chance of winning." After saying that, she was silent for a moment before she said resolutely, "Give this king some time to prepare. Half a year later, this king will bring you to open the god burial ground. Even if that person is already dead, he will definitely leave something behind." Li Yueming didn't say anything. After a long time, he nodded. After figuring out the mystery of the destruction of the ancient Great Gan. Now, the only thing that troubled him was the true identity of him. Li Yueming already had some guesses in his heart. However, before there was any concrete evidence, subjective guesses and anomalies might not necessarily represent the truth. After chatting about some trivial matters related to it, Li Yueming bid farewell to the Little Fox and embarked on the journey back to Northern Ice River Town. Although Northern Glacier Town was no longer the Star Moon Troops' headquarters in name, it still held the position of headquarters in the hearts of countless Star Moon Troop members and the people of the Northwest. When he was still on his way back to Northern Ice River Town, rumors about the phenomenon outside the 100,000 Mountains had already spread through the streets. Most of the people thought that it was just an earthworm that had not affected a large area. Only a few people who had personally gone to the scene knew that it was not that simple. Chapter 675, Sweep the 6 Nations and Unify the World. 3. Some people said that the super-powerful spirit beasts from the Shiwen Mountain had appeared on the periphery and caused large-scale destruction. There were also people who said that Li Yueming from Northern Glacier Town had triggered the wrath of heaven when he broke through here. There were also people who said that it was because 2 incomparably powerful Qi practitioners were fighting here, causing this place to be barren and the land to be overturned. As the matter escalated, the upper echelons of the 6 nations began to panic. Only a few people knew that the ancestors of the various countries had woken up from their slumber and went to Northern Glacier Town to kill Li Yueming. But now that so much time had passed, the most terrifying thing was that there was no news from the ancestors. Assuming that the terrifying marks on the periphery of the 100,000 mountains were left behind by the ancestors during the battle, then what was the current situation between the 2 sides? Why was there no news? The various countries had never thought that the ancestors, who were the rule makers of this world, would fail. But now, he couldn't help but start to mutter. However, just as they were feeling uneasy, a secret agent from Northern Ice River Town sent them a message that made them feel as if they were struck by lightning. Li Yueming was back. Once again, he appeared in Northern Glacier Town. This information, which was usually unremarkable, was now so terrifying. The upper echelons of the 5 nations couldn't help but feel their bodies turn cold, as if they had fallen into an ice cave. How was this possible? The ancestors of the various countries moved out together. Even the remaining 2 ancestors of the Great Zhou dynasty went. Logically speaking, even if Li Yueming had 9 lives, it shouldn't be enough to kill the ancestors. But why was he still able to appear now? After Li Yueming returned to North Glacier Town, he didn't waste any time. He immediately gathered all the upper echelons of the Star Moon Army for a battle meeting. Over the years, the Star Moon Army had expanded by millions. Due to the death of the older generation of soldiers, the spirit and cohesiveness of the Star Moon Army had declined. Now, under the leadership of the founder, Li Yueming, they had returned to their peak state. It was not an exaggeration to say that with the current speed of development, the Star Moon Army, which occupied countless fertile lands of the Great Zhou, would be able to form a force that could sweep across the world in just a few years. However, Li Yueming couldn't wait that long. Especially when the foundations of the various countries had already been destroyed. It had been decades since the last time he stood here. However, Li Yueming's influence in the Star Moon Troop had never dissipated. Especially after Li Yueming came out again and led the Star Moon Army to defeat the Great Zhou, Li Yueming's personal reputation reached a peak. Now, all the members of the Star Moon House looked at him with admiration and respect. Li Yueming looked around and saw the familiar and unfamiliar members of the Star Moon Army. He said, "After so many years, it's my honor to meet you again. I've already achieved half of the dream that I've described to everyone. The next goal should be to achieve the remaining half." Upon hearing this, the eyes of almost every member of the Star Moon Army lit up. Realizing the common ideal that they had made in the past, this belief had now become the greatest force that supported Northern Ice River Town and the Star Moon Army to bravely advance. Join the Star Moon Army and become a part of Northern Ice River Town. It was also the best decision many of them had ever made. However, under such circumstances, Li Yueming's next order still shocked all the upper echelons of the Star Moon Army. Many people could not believe their ears. However, Li Yueming's words were clear and clear: "Pass on my orders. The main force of the Star Moon Army near North Glacier Town will attack Dachi in the north, and the new force in Hujing will attack Great Song in the south. In the course of the battle, all the old forces that dared to stop the Star Moon Army's attack were to be swept into the trash heap. Sweep through the 6 countries and unify the world today."